Welcome back to another story on HP Story. This time, we're bringing you St. Mungo's found Harry had broken bones never healed and Goblin healers charged Dumbledore with child endangerment. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1. The Diagnostic. The fall happened in the 3rd minute of the match. Harry had been climbing, spiraling up into a steep banking turn, chasing what he thought was the snitch, a little dart of gold winking in and out of the low November clouds, when the bludger caught him. Not a glancing blow. Not the kind that rattled your teeth and left a bruise the size of a dinner plate. This one hit him square in the back, just below the left shoulder blade, with the full follow-through of Slytherin's beater Marcus Flint behind it, and the crack it made was loud enough that Madame Hooch heard it from the ground. His grip on the broom went first. Then the broom went sideways. Then Harry went somewhere the broom wasn't. He was aware, in a distant and strangely calm way, of the ground coming up to meet him. The roar of the crowd dropped out of his hearing. He had a single clear thought, tuck, and managed to turn his face to the side before he hit the grass, and then everything was a single bright white shock of impact, and then nothing at all. He came back to himself in pieces. Smell first, that particular hospital smell, clean and sharp and medicinal, that he associated with Madame Pomfrey's ward. Then sound, voices, low and professional, not panicked, which he took as a reasonable sign that he wasn't dying. Then pain, arriving in a polite but thorough inventory from his left shoulder down his ribs and pooling in his lower back, and Harry thought, with the particular philosophical acceptance of someone who had experienced a great deal of physical pain, right, so that's broken, and that, and possibly that. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was not the familiar stone vault of the Hogwarts hospital wing. It was white plaster with a faint pale gold border, and the light was warm and even, coming from lamps shaped like upturned flowers mounted at regular intervals along the walls. The bed beneath him was wider than a school bed, the sheets a clean pale green rather than white, and to his left there was a window with frosted glass through which the blurred shapes of London moved in their ordinary late afternoon way. St. Mungo's, then. They'd brought him to St. Mungo's. Harry turned his head carefully and found Professor McGonagall sitting in the chair beside the bed, her hat in her lap and her expression doing that thing it did when she was controlling herself very hard. She was not wringing her hat brim, exactly. But she was touching it. "You're awake," she said. The relief in her voice was there and then covered over quickly, but he'd heard it. Apparently. Harry tested his left arm and winced. "How bad?" "Your shoulder is broken in 3 places. 2 ribs are cracked. You have a significant concussion." She paused. "You fell approximately 60 feet, Mr. Potter." "Felt like more." He shifted against the pillow and hissed. "Where are we in the match?" McGonagall's expression sharpened in a way that suggested the match was not his primary concern. The match was suspended. "You will not be worrying about the match." "Did we suspended, Mr. Potter?" He let it go. Outside the frosted window, London moved on, unbothered. A healer had been in, he gathered, because there was a small card on the bedside table with a list of his injuries written in a neat professional hand, and next to it a glass of water with something dissolved in it that turned the water faintly blue. He reached for the water and found reaching painful enough that he stopped reaching. McGonagall rose and handed him the glass. He drank it. It tasted of nothing, which was how pain potions usually tasted when they were actually good ones, and within a few minutes the sharp edges of the pain began to soften to something manageable. Not gone. Just filed down. "The healer will be back shortly," McGonagall said, settling back into her chair. "They want to do a full diagnostic before they begin treating the shoulder. Apparently St. Mungo's protocol is more thorough than Madame Pomfrey's. She'd take issue with that. She already has. By owl. She sent 3 in the time it took the ambulance to reach the school gates." The corner of McGonagall's mouth moved, just slightly, in a way that under other circumstances might have been a smile. She included her own treatment notes. Harry looked at the ceiling. The pain was less now, sitting in the background of his body like weather rather than catastrophe, and he was able to take stock in a clearer way. 60 feet was a long way to fall. He'd fallen further during the Dementor incident in third year, but he'd been unconscious for that one. This time he'd been awake for all of it, and there was something particular about being awake for the ground coming up that stayed with you. He was alive, though. He was lying in a clean bed in St. Mungo's drinking a blue pain potion with Professor McGonagall sitting guard at his bedside, and he was alive, and the Slytherin beater had not managed to kill him even with a bludger at full force from point-blank range, and Harry chose to regard this as a win. The door opened. The healer who came in was not what Harry had expected, though he wasn't sure what he had expected, exactly. Someone like Madame Pomfrey, probably, brisk and efficient and human. This healer was not human. He was a goblin, and he was wearing the lime green robes of St. Mungo's staff with the kind of authority that suggested the robes had been designed for him rather than the other way around, and he was carrying a clipboard and a small leather case of instruments, and regarding Harry with bright, intelligent eyes the color of dark amber. He was also, Harry noted, very tall for a goblin, which still meant Harry could probably look down at him standing, but which had an effect on his presence that was hard to articulate. He simply did not look like someone who expected to be looked down at. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. His voice was precise and slightly formal, the vowels clipped in that distinctive way that suggested English was a second or fifth language being spoken with deliberate care. "I am Ragnarok, senior healer of record for your intake. How is your pain level currently?" "Better than before," Harry said. "That blue thing helped. Murtlap and diluted Skeelgrow suspension. Temporary relief only. We will need to re-break the shoulder to set it correctly." He said this in the same tone one might say we'll need to pop round to the shops, and Harry respected that. He hated being managed about pain. Ragnarok pulled up the rolling stool beside the bed, set his clipboard on his knee, and uncapped his pen. "I need to ask you several intake questions before we begin the full diagnostic. Some of them will seem routine. Please answer them as accurately as possible." "All right. Are you currently taking any potions, prescribed or otherwise?" "No." "Any known allergies to medicinal potions, magical or mundane?" "Not that I know of." "Have you had any significant medical procedures in the past 12 months? Operations, curse removal, bone regrowth?" Harry thought about it. "Madame Pomfrey used Skeelgrow on me in second year. Whole arm after, well, the bones were removed by accident. Took overnight." Ragnarok's pen paused. "Removed." "A teacher tried to mend a broken arm during a Quidditch match and removed all the bones instead." "All of them." The pen resumed, but there was something in Ragnarok's expression that was not exactly readable. "Which arm?" "Right. I'm right-handed." "And prior to this incident, any history of broken bones?" Harry opened his mouth to say no and then stopped. It wasn't that he was lying. It was more that the question required him to think about something he generally didn't think about, which was his medical history prior to Hogwarts, and the honest answer was that he didn't entirely know. He remembered breaking his arm, well, having it broken for him, falling from a tree when he was 8 and Dudley's friends had cornered him up it. He remembered his Aunt Petunia putting something on it from a tube and wrapping it tight and telling him not to complain. He remembered it hurt for a long time after that, longer than it seemed like it should. "Once," he said. "When I was 8. My arm. I don't think it was treated properly." "On your non-dominant side?" "The left, yeah." Ragnarok made a note. Something in the quality of his attention had changed, although his expression hadn't. It was the pen moving slightly differently, more slowly, as if what he was writing had become more important than what he'd been writing before. "Any other injuries you can recall from childhood?" "Significant ones." Harry thought about Dudley's fists. He thought about stairs. He thought about the specific geography of number 4, Privet Drive, the way the second step from the bottom creaked, the way the door of the cupboard under the stairs had a lock on the outside. "Some," he said carefully. "The Dursleys weren't, I wasn't ill very much. But I fell a lot. When I was small. Children do fall." Ragnar said, in a neutral tone that managed to communicate that he was not necessarily talking about falling. Professor McGonagall had gone very still in her chair. Right, Harry said, because there was no way to make that simpler. I fell a lot. Ragnar made a longer note this time. He capped his pen and set the clipboard aside. I am going to perform the full intake diagnostic now, Mr. Potter. It is standard procedure for all patients admitted with significant traumatic injury. The diagnostic will take approximately 4 minutes. It is not painful. He opened the leather case and withdrew a wand, shorter than a wizard's wand, the wood darker, carved with patterns Harry didn't recognize, and a flat disc of what looked like polished obsidian, about the size of his palm. Please try to remain still. What does it show? Everything, Ragnar said simply. Current injuries and their severity. Recent injuries, up to 6 months. And for patients under 17, whose bones retain a more complete growth record, a great deal more. He began. The wand moved in slow, precise arcs, and the obsidian disc floated up from his palm and settled about a foot above Harry's chest, spinning slowly. It began to glow, a soft internal light that started at the center and moved outward, reading something that Harry couldn't feel or see but that Ragnar was watching with the focused intensity of someone reading a text they already half suspected was going to be difficult. McGonagall made a small sound. Harry turned his head to look at her, and found her watching the disc with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She wasn't a woman given to displaying strong emotion on short notice. She had 30 years of teaching to her name, and a manner that could stop a charging troll at 50 yards, and he had seen her worried and he had seen her angry and he had once seen her genuinely frightened during the battle business in 3rd year, but he had never seen her look like she looked right now, which was as if something she was seeing had reached across the room and hit her. He looked up at the disc. He didn't understand what he was seeing exactly. It wasn't like an X-ray, wasn't producing an image of his skeleton in any way he could easily read, but it was producing something, a kind of 3-dimensional map in pale light, and within that map there were points of color, and the points of color were the problem. The current injuries showed in bright sharp red, shoulder, ribs, back. Those he'd expected. But they were surrounded by a constellation of other points in older, duller colors, and there were a great many of them, and they were not clustered around the shoulder or the ribs but distributed across his entire skeletal structure in a way that didn't look like a fall from 60 feet. A fall from 60 feet concentrated the damage. This was not concentrated. Ragnar, Harry said. One moment. The goblin's voice was even, but his attention was wholly on the disc now, and he was moving the wand in smaller, more specific arcs, drawing down close examinations of individual points in that constellation. What is that? One moment, please. Not dismissive. Just the request of someone who needed to finish reading before they could speak accurately about what they'd read. The 4 minutes felt like longer. At some point the door opened and another healer looked in, human, middle-aged, with the harried expression of someone perpetually behind schedule, and Ragnar said something short and sharp in a language Harry didn't know, and the door closed again and did not reopen. McGonagall rose from her chair. She moved to stand at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, watching the disc. Professor, Harry said. Is it? Am I looking at my own bones? Yes. What's all the other color? Those older ones. She pressed her lips together. I think we should wait for the healer to explain. I'd like to know now. She looked at him over the foot of the bed. He looked back at her. He wasn't frightened, exactly. The pain potion was still working, and there was a quality to this moment that felt more like information arriving than catastrophe arriving, and he met her eyes steadily and waited. She said, Harry, very quietly, and then Ragnar lowered his wand. The disc settled back into his palm and the light died. The room felt slightly different without it, smaller, more ordinary, a hospital room rather than a diagnostic chamber. Ragnar sat with the disc in his hand for a moment without speaking. He was looking at the wall above Harry's bed, not at Harry, and his amber eyes were doing something complicated. Then he looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, he said. I need to ask you some additional questions, and I need you to answer them honestly regardless of how the questions make you feel. All right. The diagnostic has revealed your 3 current traumatic injuries from today's incident. He paused. It has also revealed 23 historical fracture sites in various stages of improper healing or complete non-healing. These sites are distributed across your skeleton from approximately your 2nd year of life to your 11th. Your left forearm, which you mentioned, shows 2 distinct fracture sites, one of which healed incorrectly and was never reset, and one of which shows evidence of never having been treated at all. You have 3 fingers on your right hand that were broken and healed without any medical intervention. Your left knee shows evidence of 2 impacts with what the diagnostic identifies as blunt force in early childhood. Your 4th and 5th ribs on the right side were both fractured at some point between your 5th and 7th years of life. He stopped. Do you want me to continue? Harry had very carefully not moved during this recitation. He wasn't sure when he'd stop breathing, but he became aware at some point that he had, and he started again, deliberately. Yes, he said. Continue. Ragnock continued. He was thorough and precise and made no editorial comment as he went, which Harry found he was grateful for, because the list was long and the clinical language was the only thing that kept it from being something else. Something larger and more unwieldy that he wasn't sure he had the architecture to contain right now. Fractured right collarbone, probably age 7, set badly and rebroken at some point later. Left wrist, compound fracture, age 8 or 9, never treated medically. Several of his vertebrae, the lower back Harry had always vaguely thought of as just the way his back felt, showed evidence of repeated compressive impact. When Ragnock finished, the room was very quiet. I didn't know about all of those, Harry said. His voice came out level, which surprised him slightly. Some of them I didn't know about. Your body adapted, Ragnock said. When bones heal without treatment, the surrounding musculature compensates. You would have learned to move in ways that minimize the pain of the improperly healed sites without consciously understanding that was what you were doing. So I just walked around like that. For approximately 11 years prior to your arrival at Hogwarts. Ragnock set the disc carefully in his case and closed it. And for 3 years at Hogwarts, with several additional injuries from Quidditch, none of which are related to abuse and all of which appear to have been treated competently by your school's matron. The word abuse sat in the room like a brick someone had dropped through the window. McGonagall made a sound that was not quite a word. Harry looked at her. She was standing at the foot of the bed with her arms still crossed, but the posture had changed. She was holding herself, he realized, not standing stiffly, and her face had done something he'd never seen it do before. The controlled expression had broken, just slightly, just enough to show what was underneath, and what was underneath was something raw and old and very, very angry. Professor, he said. I'm fine, she said in a voice that was not fine. I'm okay. You are not okay, she said, sharp and sudden, and then stopped herself. Drew a breath. I apologize. That was. She stopped again. I have taught you for 3 years, Potter. 3 years. And I did not. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. You couldn't have known, Harry said. No, Ragnock said quietly. She could not have known from observation. The injuries are old and the compensatory adaptations disguise them. Only a full diagnostic reveals the complete record. He paused. Which is why what I am about to tell you matters a great deal. Harry waited. A full diagnostic of the kind I have just performed is standard intake procedure at St. Mungo's for all patients under 17 admitted with traumatic injury. This procedure existed before my appointment here. It has existed for 40 years. He let that sit for a moment. You attended this hospital on one previous occasion, Mr. Potter. Age 11. Brought in by your schoolmaster for a transfiguration-related hand injury in your first term at Hogwarts. I don't remember that, Harry said. I remember the hand thing, but I don't remember coming here. You were 11 and presumably told to wait outside while the adults discussed your treatment. Ragnar's voice was dry in a way that suggested this was not an accident of phrasing. A standard diagnostic would have been performed at that admission. The silence stretched. And no one did anything. Harry said. I cannot speak to what happened or did not happen at that admission. Ragnar said carefully. I can tell you that no report was filed with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at that time, which under Section 44 of the Child Welfare and Magical Persons Act of 1979 would have been mandatory upon the discovery of what we are looking at. I can tell you that no flag exists on your medical file to indicate this diagnostic was ever reviewed by a senior healer of record. And I can tell you that the admitting physician for that visit was one healer Archibald Smethwick, who retired in 1994. Conveniently, McGonagall said, and her voice had gone flat and cold in a way that made the hair on the back of Harry's neck stand up slightly, because he knew that voice from Transfiguration classes and it meant someone was in a very great deal of trouble. I would not speculate, Ragnar said. I will only say that the diagnostic today shows what it shows, and the legal obligations of my position are not subject to speculation. He looked at Harry directly. Mr. Potter, I am required by both St. Mungo's protocol and by the laws governing my people's practice rights to file a mandatory report with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement within 24 hours of discovering evidence of this nature. I am telling you this because you are the patient, you are old enough to be told, and because the report will concern you directly. Who will the report be filed against? McGonagall asked. The report will name your magical guardians, Ragnar said, who are, as I understand it, the same individuals as your Muggle legal guardians, pending the appointment of a formal magical guardian upon your discovery by the wizarding world. He looked at Harry again, and for just a moment something in his amber eyes was not entirely professional, something more complicated, older, like the look of someone whose people had their own very long memories of being at the mercy of those who decided what was necessary. Your guardians were appointed under a specific directive. That directive came from a specific source. Dumbledore, Harry said. The directive placing you with your current guardians was issued personally by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot and Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, in the autumn of 1981. Ragnar's voice was entirely even. He will, accordingly, be named as a secondary respondent in my report. The room went very, very quiet. Harry sat with this for a moment. Outside the frosted window London continued its evening commute, entirely indifferent. Somewhere down the corridor a healer was talking to a patient in a cheerful carrying voice about the proper application of bruised paste. The hospital was going about its business. He'll try to stop it, Harry said. Not panicked. Just noting a likely variable. He may try, Ragnar agreed. I have worked in this institution for 11 years, Mr. Potter. I am the first goblin to hold a senior healer position in the history of St. Mungo's. I arrived here after a legal battle that lasted 6 years and resulted in formal practice rights being extended to trained goblin medical practitioners under the Magical Beings Provisions Act. I am aware of what it is to operate in an institution that would prefer you did not. His eyes were steady and entirely without performance. I filed my first mandatory report on a powerful wizard in 1996. The complaints went all the way to the minister's office. I am still here. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Can I see the diagnostic results? He asked. Ragnar reached into his case and retrieved the obsidian disc. He passed it to Harry without hesitation. When Harry held it, it warmed in his hand, and the internal glow returned, faint and cool, and the three-dimensional map assembled itself in the air above his palm, his skeleton, mapped in light, the current injuries in red, the historical record in its spread of duller older colors, amber and orange, and the pale yellow-green of things that had knit wrong rather than not at all. He looked at it for a long time. He made himself look at all of it. The thing about the list, read aloud, was that it was abstract. Numbers and anatomical terms and age ranges. The map was different. The map was a picture, and the picture was of him, and the colors were of things that had happened in the body he lived in every day, and he had not known that about himself, and that was the part that was strange. He had known about some of the injuries. He remembered specific incidents, the specific geography of some of those colors. But he had not known there were 23 of them. He had not known about the vertebrae. He had not known that his left wrist, which sometimes ached in cold weather, and which he'd always assumed was just a quirk of him, was the site of a compound fracture that had never seen the inside of a hospital. He had been 11 years old when the magical world found him. Someone had brought him to St. Mungo's in that first term, and someone had performed this diagnostic, or something like it, and someone had looked at this map, or something like it, and had not filed a mandatory report, and he had gone back to the cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive every summer after that. Harry handed the disc back to Ragnock. "File the report," he said. "I had already decided to do so," Ragnock said. "I asked your input because you are the patient, and because your consent, while not legally required, is something I believe a patient is owed." He took the disc back and closed the case. "Your shoulder will need to be rebroken and set this evening. I want to complete that before tomorrow. The other historical sites will need to be addressed over the course of several sessions." He stood from the rolling stool. "Is there someone you would like contacted? A family member, a friend?" Harry started and stopped. "My godfather. Sirius Black. I don't know how to reach him. The situation with him is complicated." "I know who Sirius Black is," Ragnock said, without particular inflection. "I will note that in your file. Is there someone currently reachable?" "The Weasleys," Harry said immediately. "Arthur and Molly Weasley. They'd want to know." "I'll send word," McGonagall said firmly. She was already on her feet, composure returned or reconstructed, which with McGonagall was almost the same thing. But the anger was still in her eyes, sitting there like a banked coal, and Harry thought it had not gone anywhere. It had just found somewhere to wait. "I'll contact the Weasleys. I'll also need to contact the headmaster. The headmaster will be contacted as part of the formal notification process," Ragnock said. "I would request, Professor, that you allow that contact to proceed through official channels rather than preceding it with an informal conversation." He paused. "This is not a directive. It is a professional request. The value of the official report is partly in the fact of its arriving without warning." McGonagall looked at him. Something passed between them, an understanding of the kind that sometimes forms between people who have both spent a great deal of time being told what they couldn't do in spaces that had been told they didn't belong in. "I'll contact the Weasleys," she said again. "And no one else until I hear from you." "Thank you," Ragnock said. She left. The door closed with a soft, deliberate click that sounded, in the quiet hospital room, nothing at all like the beginning of something and entirely like one. Harry sat in the pale green bed with London moving beyond his frosted window, his shoulder broken in 3 places and his ribs cracked and his back a mess of old improperly healed injuries that he was only just learning to name, and he thought about the map of colors floating above his palm, and he thought about 11 years, and he thought about the fact that someone, somewhere, had looked at something like that map and had made a decision. He thought about what the word necessary meant when you were the thing that had been deemed necessary to sacrifice. "Ragnock," he said. The goblin paused at the door. "Thank you for telling me." Ragnock turned to look at him. The professional composure was fully in place, the clipboard tucked under one arm, the leather case in hand. "You are my patient," he said. "You are entitled to accurate information about your own body and your own history." Then, after a moment that felt deliberate, "The report will be filed tonight, before the shoulder is set, so that the procedure is not delayed by any subsequent attempt to intervene." Harry heard what was unsaid in that. "You think someone might try to stop it?" "I think," Ragnock said carefully, "that powerful people rarely appreciate formal processes that they cannot influence. And I think that people who are accustomed to managing situations before they become official records are very quick movers when they discover a record has been started without their knowledge." He opened the door. "I have been filing mandatory reports for 11 years, Mr. Potter. In that time I have learned that the most important moment in any formal process is the period before the subject of the report becomes aware one exists. The door opened. The corridor sounds of St. Mungo's came in briefly, voices, footsteps, the distant chime of the ward bell, the whole ordinary machinery of a place where people brought their broken things to be mended. "Rest for 40 minutes, Ragnock said. "Then we'll set the shoulder." And he was gone. Harry lay back against his pillow and looked at the ceiling and listened to London outside his window, and the room was very quiet, and somewhere in the hospital a goblin healer was already picking up his pen. Chapter 2. The charges filed. The report left Ragnock's desk at 7:43 in the evening. It was not a long document. Ragnock had learned over 11 years that legal documents derived their power not from length but from precision, and this one was precise in the way a surgical instrument is precise, designed to cut exactly where it was pointed and nowhere else. It named Vernon Disley and Petunia Disley of No. 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey as primary respondents. It named Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore as secondary respondent under the directive clause of Section 44, subsection 3, which covered any individual who had formally arranged a child's care environment and had either known or had reasonable cause to know of harmful conditions within that environment. The diagnostic results were attached in full. All 23 sites. The three-dimensional mapping rendered onto parchment in careful anatomical notation. The age range estimates for each injury, calculated from bone density and growth plate evidence, precise to within 18 months. Ragnock signed it, sealed it with the mark of the Goblin Healers' Council, and sent 2 copies simultaneously, one to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and one to the Goblin High Council's Legal Division, which had oversight of any case in which a goblin practitioner filed a mandatory report. The second copy was not legally required. It was strategically essential. He then walked down the corridor to Theatre 4 and broke Harry Potter's shoulder in 3 specific places, said it correctly, and performed the regrowth charm with an efficiency that his attending junior healer would later describe in her notes as almost aggressive. Harry had not made a sound during the procedure. Ragnock had given him a full pain block first, which was standard, but the lack of sound was not about the pain block. It was about the particular self-containment of someone who had learned very young that making noise did not help. Ragnock recognized that quality. He had seen it before in patients whose histories looked like Harry Potter's history. He did not comment on it. He simply did the work well, set the shoulder correctly, and left the regrowth charm running. 4 hours, he told Harry, when it was done. Then the ribs. Sleep if you can. I'm not really tired, Harry said. His voice was slightly slurred from the pain block, but his eyes were alert. No, Ragnock agreed. I imagine not. He left the room and went to sit in his office and wait for the response that would arrive within the hour. It took 43 minutes. The response did not come from the DMLE. It came from Dumbledore. This was, technically, impossible. The report to the DMLE was sealed under the Privacy of Medical Records Act and could not be disclosed to any named respondent without a formal court order. The report to the Goblin High Council was doubly sealed under Goblin legal protections that were even more stringent. There was no legal mechanism by which Albus Dumbledore should have known about the report's existence before morning at the earliest, and likely longer given standard DMLE processing times. Ragnock read the arrival notification on his desk. One visitor, St. Mungo's main ward, requesting Senior Healer Ragnock by name, refuses to be redirected, and thought very calmly that this was actually useful information. It told him that Dumbledore had a source inside the DMLE processing office. It told him that the source was fast. And it told him that the man was rattled enough to come in person rather than send an intermediary, which meant the report had landed exactly as hard as Ragnock had calculated it would. He closed the notification, straightened his robes, and went down to the main ward reception. Dumbledore was standing near the front desk in his traveling robes, deep blue, stars that moved, hat tucked under one arm, and the expression on his face was the one Ragnock had been told to expect from people who had read descriptions of the man. It was warm, calm, faintly concerned, the expression of someone who was worried and wanted to help. It was an excellent expression. It would work on most people. "Healer Ragnarok," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm as well, the warmth of someone who knew exactly how to use warmth. "Thank you for seeing me. I came as quickly as I could when I heard." "Poor Harry, a terrible fall, and I understand the injuries are." "Good evening, Headmaster," Ragnarok said. "The patient is stable. His current injuries are being treated. You are not listed as his next of kin or legal guardian, so I am not able to discuss his medical condition with you." Dumbledore paused, just a fraction, and in that fraction Ragnarok observed the small recalibration of a very intelligent person encountering an obstacle that had been placed with care. "Of course. I'm not here in a medical capacity, exactly. I'm here as Harry's, well, as someone who has always seen to his well-being." "I was notified. Through what channel?" Ragnarok asked pleasantly. Another pause. Shorter this time, because the man was fast. "A colleague at the ministry mentioned, the report filed this evening is sealed under the Privacy of Medical Records Act, Section 22. Disclosure to any named respondent prior to official notification through the DMLE constitutes a breach of that seal." Ragnarok tilted his head slightly. "I will be noting the timeline of your arrival in my records, Headmaster. The report was filed at 7:43. You arrived here at 8:26. The DMLE's standard processing time for sealed mandatory reports is a minimum of 6 to 8 hours. I find the arithmetic interesting." Dumbledore looked at him. The warmth in his expression had not disappeared, but it had become slightly more calculated, the warmth of a man who was looking at the chessboard and finding a piece where he hadn't expected one. "You're very thorough," he said. "I am a healer," Ragnarok said. "Thoroughness is the profession." "Healer Ragnarok." Dumbledore's voice shifted, not dramatically, but enough, a note lower, a touch more serious, the warmth making room for gravity. The voice of a man about to explain something important to someone who had misunderstood. "I understand that what the diagnostic revealed today is deeply concerning. I want to be clear that Harry's well-being has always been my primary concern. The decisions I made in 1981 regarding his placement were made under extraordinary circumstances, with the best available information, for reasons I would be very glad to discuss with you in a more private setting." "I'm sure you would," Ragnarok said. "The Dursley family provided Harry with safety," Dumbledore said. "A specific magical protection, blood magic of an ancient and powerful kind, required that Harry remain with his mother's family. Without that protection, the danger to his life from remaining enemies of the Order would have been. The report does not concern magical protection protocols," Ragnarok said. "The report concerns the physical evidence of repeated, untreated traumatic injury to a minor over a period of 9 years." He let a beat pass. "The blood magic you are describing may well exist and may well be relevant. That is a conversation for the DMLE and the Wiesengemot. It is not a conversation that alters the medical record, and it is not a conversation that excuses the mandatory reporting obligation that Healer Smethwick failed to fulfill during Harry Potter's 1991 admission." The mention of Smethwick landed. Ragnarok watched it land. Dumbledore did not flinch, exactly, but there was a quality of stillness that came into him at that name, the stillness of a man who had just understood the full scope of the problem. "Archibald Smethwick was a fine healer," Dumbledore said carefully. "He was," Ragnarok agreed. "And he failed to file a mandatory report in 1991 despite diagnostic results that would have compelled it. I have already filed a separate inquiry with the Healers' Council regarding that omission." He paused. "I did not come to this profession to be managed, Headmaster. My people did not spend 6 years in legal proceedings establishing our practice rights in this institution so that a goblin healer with full senior healer credentials could be persuaded to misplace paperwork in the small hours of the morning." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the warmth had not gone, it never entirely went, which was a thing in itself, but there was something beneath it now, something older and more careful. "I think you are a very principled man," he said. "I respect that. I would ask only that you consider whether the timing of this action, during Harry's 4th year, in the middle of a tournament that already puts him at considerable risk, serves Harry's actual interests? I think that question, Ragnock said, is exactly the kind of question that should be answered by Harry Potter himself, who is 14 years old, in possession of accurate information about his own medical history, and capable of forming his own opinions. He paused. As I told him when I gave him the diagnostic results. This time the stillness in Dumbledore was not brief. You told him, Dumbledore said. He is the patient. He is entitled to his medical record. Ragnock held his gaze without difficulty. He had been meeting the eyes of powerful wizards for 11 years and had yet to find the experience particularly daunting. Was there anything else I can help you with this evening, Headmaster? If not, visiting hours ended at 8 o'clock, and I have a patient whose ribs need attention. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. And then something shifted behind his eyes. Not defeat, not exactly, because men like Dumbledore did not do defeat in short, clear movements. It was a longer, slower thing with them, but a recognition. An acknowledgement that the board was different from what it had been this morning. I hope Harry recovers quickly, he said, and his voice was entirely genuine, which was, Ragnock thought, the most complicated thing about the man. He will, Ragnock said. He's remarkably resilient. One might say that under different circumstances it would be an admirable quality. He let that settle where it would. Good night, Headmaster. He turned and walked back through the ward without looking back, because the best way to end a conversation was to be the one who ended it. Harry was awake when Ragnock came back to set the ribs. He was sitting up against his pillows with the careful posture of someone navigating a newly set shoulder, and he had clearly been thinking rather than resting, which was evident in the expression on his face. Not anxious, not upset, but the expression of someone who had been sorting through a very large pile of information and was now arranging it into something that made sense. Dumbledore came, Harry said. It wasn't a question. He did, Ragnock said. He sat on the rolling stool and opened the case. How did you know? You said the most important moment was before he found out. The fact that you're back means he found out. Harry paused. And the fact that you're back and not him means you handled it. I declined to discuss your case with him, yes. Ragnock withdrew his wand and the secondary instrument, a slim rod of polished bone that he used for rib work. Lie back. This will be uncomfortable but not acutely painful. Harry lay back. What did he say? He explained that the decisions he made in 1981 were made under extraordinary circumstances for good reasons. Ragnock began the diagnostic pass for the ribs, mapping the exact angles of the fractures. He also asked whether the timing of my report served your interests. Of course he did. Harry was quiet for a moment, while Ragnock worked. He always does that. Asks whether things serve your interests in a way that means his interests. Ragnock moved the bone rod in a slow arc and felt the resistance of the left upper fracture. You are perceptive about him. I've had 4 years to watch him. Harry kept his voice even, which required something. Ragnock could see it in the slight tension of the jaw, the deliberate relaxed position of the hands. He's brilliant. He's genuinely brilliant. And I think he does care about me. That's the bit that makes it hard. He paused. He thinks all of it was necessary. He said as much? Ragnock confirmed, beginning the rib-setting pass. Blood magic protection, ancient and powerful, required you to remain with your mother's family. Yeah. Harry was quiet while the charm worked. The thing is, that might even be true. I don't know enough about blood magic to argue with it. He took a careful breath. But knowing it might be necessary doesn't mean it wasn't what it was. Ragnock paused in his work. He looked at his patient, 14 years old, concussed, shoulder freshly set, currently having his ribs repaired, lying in a hospital bed with the precise quality of someone who had learned at a very young age that the adults in charge of the room were going to make the decisions regardless. He resumed the charm. No, he said. It does not. He didn't try to bribe you. He did not offer me money, no. Ragnock's voice was dry. He did imply that my report was poorly timed and showed a lack of appreciation for the larger context. This is a more sophisticated form of the same approach. What did you say? I noted the arithmetic of his arrival time and told him I had no interest in misplacing paperwork. He completed the upper rib and moved to the second fracture. He also made a point of noting that you are currently in the middle of a tournament that puts you at considerable risk. I suspect he hoped I would feel that raising additional instability at this moment was irresponsible. Harry made a sound that was not quite a laugh but had the shape of one. I didn't ask to be in the tournament. My name came out of the goblet of fire and Dumbledore looked at me for 30 seconds and decided I must have put it in myself. He paused. He always lands on whatever interpretation makes the thing that's happening already make sense. The second rib is going to take a minute, Ragnock said. It is fractured in an awkward position. Try not to talk. Harry stopped talking. Ragnock worked in silence for several minutes, coaxing the fracture into alignment with the careful precision that had made him, in the opinion of several colleagues who would never say it directly, the best rib work healer in the building. Fractured ribs were ungrateful things. They moved. They did not sit still while you worked on them the way a broken arm sat still. They had opinions. When it was done, he withdrew the instruments and let Harry breathe for a moment. The DMLU will process the report by morning, Ragnock said, beginning to pack the case. An investigator will be assigned. You will most likely be asked for a formal statement within the next 48 hours. You do not have to give one without someone present who is acting in your interests. Who counts as acting in my interests? Harry asked. Legally, I mean. A formally appointed advocate. A legal guardian, if one can be established independent of the current situation. Or, Ragnock paused. The Goblin High Council's legal division has the authority to appoint an independent advocate in cases where the primary legal authority over a minor is itself under investigation. This prevents the obvious problem of an accused guardian representing the interests of the child who has been harmed. Harry was quiet, processing. So if Dumbledore is under investigation, he can't be the one deciding what I do or say. Correct. And as of this morning's report naming him as secondary respondent, he is under investigation. Ragnock closed the case. I have already sent the relevant notification to the council. An advocate will be assigned by morning. A goblin advocate? Yes. The council's legal division has 3. They are very good. He paused. They are also very difficult to intimidate, which in the current situation I consider a significant professional quality. Harry looked at him. You planned all of this, he said. Not accusatory. Just noting. I performed a diagnostic, reported my findings as legally required, and ensured that the formal processes protecting a minor patient were in place before any interested party had the opportunity to engage with those processes. Ragnock stood. That is my job. You also made sure I got told before Dumbledore found out. And you made sure I had time to actually understand what I was looking at before it became an official thing. Harry paused. That part wasn't just your job. Ragnock picked up the case and his clipboard. Get some sleep, he said. Your friends will be here in the morning. He was at the door when Harry spoke again. Why? Not challenging. Genuinely asking. You said yourself you didn't have to get my consent. You could have just filed and been done with it. Why did you tell me? Ragnock stood in the doorway for a moment. The corridor sounds came in, quiet now, the late-night sounds of a ward settling, a healer's soft footsteps, the distant chime of the overnight bell. My people have a saying, he said. A debt unpaid is a chain. A truth withheld is a cage. He looked back at Harry. You had been in a cage for a very long time, Mr. Potter. I saw no reason to lock the door again on my way out. He left. The Weasleys arrived at 7 in the morning. All of them. This was not precisely what McGonagall had arranged when she'd sent her owl. She had expected Arthur and Molly, possibly Ron, but the Weasley family's response to one of their own being in hospital was apparently to arrive as a complete unit, which was why Harry woke up to the sound of 6 voices in the corridor outside his room attempting to moderate themselves down to one voice at a time with limited success. Molly Weasley came through the door first. She had clearly been crying in the corridor, and had clearly decided to stop before she came in, and the result was an expression of furious affection that Harry had never quite found a way to be prepared for. She sat on the edge of his bed and put both hands on his face and looked at him with the particular intensity of someone conducting a personal inventory. "You're all right," she said. Not a question. An instruction. "I'm all right," Harry confirmed. She pulled him into a careful hug that managed to avoid his shoulder, and said nothing for a moment. Harry held on. He was not someone who had received a great deal of physical comfort in his life, and he was not always sure what to do with it. But Molly Weasley's hugs had a quality of absolute certainty about them that bypassed the uncertainty, and so he held on. Behind her, Arthur Weasley had come in and was standing near the door with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who was managing several strong feelings in parallel. His eyes had gone to Harry's shoulder, the position of it, the slight unnatural evenness that was the regrowth charm working, and then to Harry's face, and the management of feelings was visible in the particular careful set of his jaw. Ron came in last, because he'd clearly been in the corridor processing something first. He came in with the expression of someone who had arrived at a destination and was not sure what to do when they got there, and he sat in the chair by the bed that McGonagall had occupied yesterday, and he looked at Harry with the directness that was one of the things Harry valued most about him. "They're saying you fell 60 feet, Ron said. "About that, yeah? That's almost as far as 3rd year. 3rd year I was unconscious for it." Ron absorbed this. "Right. Okay. Are the shoulders actually fixed?" "Being fixed takes a while." Harry shifted. "Ragnar's good, though. Better than Madame Pomfrey at this specifically, I think. I'll tell you everything. There's a lot to tell." The twins, Fred and George, had arrived in the doorway and were leaning against either side of the frame in their characteristic twin posture, which they deployed when something required them to be present without being loud. Their faces were doing something more serious than their usual range of expression, which Harry noted and which told him that the news had already moved through the family in some form. He told them. He started with the bludger and the fall, moved through waking up in St. Mungo's, moved through Ragnarok and the diagnostic and the disc above his palm and the list of 23 fracture sites. He kept his voice level. He was not trying to perform being fine, but he also was not performing being destroyed, because he genuinely wasn't destroyed. He was something else, something clearer and colder than destruction, and the telling of it came out in that register. Molly Weasley held his hand throughout. When he got to Dumbledore, the mandatory report, the secondary respondent, the 43-minute gap between the filing and the arrival at the ward, the temperature in the room changed. It was Fred who changed it, Fred who had been leaning in the doorway with the performance of casual ease and who was no longer performing casual ease, who had gone quite still in the way that the twins went still when something moved from the category of general injustice into the category of this happened to someone we know. Arthur Weasley sat down on the windowsill. "He came here last night," he said. Not a question. "Before you were even, before the shoulder was even set. Ragnarok handled it," Harry said. "I have a great deal of respect for Ragnarok," Arthur said quietly, and the sentence had weight to it, the weight of someone who had spent a career at the Ministry around people who did not have a great deal of respect for goblins, and who had always found this embarrassing. Ron was looking at Harry with an expression that was working through several things. "What happens now?" he said finally. "With Dumbledore. What actually happens? DMLE investigation. Probably a Wisengamot hearing at some point." Harry paused. "And apparently I'm getting a goblin advocate. An independent one, so no one involved in the investigation is making my decisions." "A goblin advocate," Fred said from the doorway. "For Harry Potter." He said it with a specific kind of satisfaction, the tone of someone who had wanted the order of things disrupted for a long time and was finding the manner of the disruption pleasing. "Ragnarok says they're good," Harry said. They're absolutely terrifying. George confirmed, from the other door frame. Charlie had a thing with Gringotts over a debt renegotiation once and the council sent one, and Dad said, I said they were very thorough. Arthur said carefully. You said he read the contract back to the Gringotts board member word by word in the original gobbledygook, and then in 3 translations, and then pointed out an error that cost the bank 7,000 galleons. George said, while having breakfast. That is also what happened, Arthur confirmed. Harry felt something shift in his chest. It was not exactly hope. He was careful about hope in the way that people are careful about things they've been given and had removed enough times. But it was something adjacent, something that had the quality of solidity where before there had been the familiar uncertain ground of someone will sort this out that had always turned out to mean someone will sort this out in the way that is convenient for the people sorting it. This was different. The people sorting it were not, for once, the people who had decided the situation was fine. Hermione arrived at 9:30, after the rest of the family had rotated in and out and Ron had claimed the chair with the tenacity of someone who intended to keep it. She came in with the particular expression she wore when she had read everything available on a subject and had opinions, and was containing them with difficulty. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked at Harry's shoulder, looked at his face, and said, I've been reading the Child Welfare and Magical Persons Act since 6 this morning. Of course you have, Ron said. She ignored this. The mandatory reporting obligation under Section 44 is absolute. There are no exemptions. Not for extenuating circumstances, not for extraordinary magical situations, not for anything. Her voice had that vibrating quality it got when she was angry and trying to be precise. There is literally no legal argument for why Healer Smethwick should not have filed in 1991. If Dumbledore asked him not to, we don't know that, Harry said. I know, Hermione said. But if he did, that's not just a failure to report. That's an active suppression of a mandatory legal process. She paused. Harry. That's criminal. The words sat in the room. Yes, Harry said. I know. Hermione looked at him. The opinions were still there, but she was reading his face now, moving from legal analysis to the actual person in front of her, and when she found what was there, not devastation, not fury, but the clear, cold steadiness of someone who has already moved through the initial shock into something more like resolution, her own expression did something complicated. Are you all right? She asked quietly. I'm working on it, he said honestly. She took his hand. She wasn't the sort who did that regularly, which made it mean more. What do you need? He thought about it. Outside, the morning was grey and solid above London, and St. Mungo's was going about its morning business, and somewhere in the building Ragnarok was already at his desk, and somewhere across the city the Demelli was opening its morning post, and somewhere a Goblin legal advocate was sitting down to read the notification that had arrived from the High Council. I need to not go back there, Harry said. The Dursleys. This summer and every summer. I need that to stop. The advocate can file for emergency placement review, Hermione said immediately. Under the Act, if a minor is the subject of a mandatory report, the placement can be suspended pending investigation. That's... She paused. I need to check the exact statute. I've already made the notation, said a voice from the doorway. They all looked. Ragnarok stood in the door with a small, impeccably dressed goblin beside him, shorter than Ragnarok, older, with the bright eyes and the controlled stillness of someone who measured everything before they moved. She was wearing dark robes with no insignia, carrying a slim leather briefcase, and regarding the room with the detached assessment of a professional who has walked into a great many rooms and found the situation exactly as complicated as she expected. Mr. Potter, Ragnarok said. This is Advocate Goldthorn of the High Council's Legal Division. She arrived this morning. Earlier than anticipated, Goldthorn said. Her English was flawless and precise, with the same quality of deliberateness as Ragnarok's but with additional edge, the edge of someone who used language as a primary tool and had sharpened it accordingly. When I read the file, I took an earlier train. She looked at Harry with a directness that was not unkind but was utterly without pretense. I have reviewed the diagnostic results, the mandatory report, the secondary respondent notation, and the timeline of Headmaster Dumbledore's arrival at this hospital last night. I have several questions. All right, Harry said. Do you wish to be present for all legal proceedings pertaining to this matter? Yes. Do you authorize me to act as your independent legal advocate for the purposes of this investigation, which means I will represent your interests, and only your interests, and will not be subject to direction from any other party including Hogwarts staff, the Wizengamot, or any self-appointed guardian figure? Yes. Are you currently under any magical obligation, oath, ward, compulsion, that might restrict what you can say or disclose to legal authorities? Harry blinked. Not that I know of. Goldthorn looked at Ragnarok. Full magical binding diagnostic? I can have it done this morning, Ragnarok said. Please do. She looked back at Harry. It is a standard precaution. In cases involving powerful wizards and long-term arrangements, magical compulsions are occasionally a factor. I do not say this to alarm you. I say it because I intend to cover all variables. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a slim folder, which she set on the bedside table. This is a summary of your legal position as of this morning. Your placement with the Dursley family is under emergency review as of 7 this morning. I filed the suspension notice on the train. You will not be returning to that address at the end of term regardless of the investigation's outcome. Temporary alternative placement will be arranged. Ron made a sound. Harry turned and found him with his mouth open, looking at Goldthorn with an expression that was doing several things, the primary one of which was stunned relief on someone else's behalf. He shut his mouth. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at the folder on the bedside table. He had known it intellectually, that the address on Privet Drive was no longer a fixed point. Ragnarok had said it. The process implied it. But it was a different thing to have it said plainly by a goblin advocate who had taken an earlier train because she'd read the file and wanted to make sure the placement suspension happened before morning. Thank you, he said. I have not done the work yet, Goldthorn said. This is only the beginning. The investigation will be long, and the headmaster is powerful and well-connected and will not be a passive subject of inquiry. She closed the briefcase with a clean, decisive snap. However, I should tell you that I have managed 3 cases in the last decade involving high-profile secondary respondents, and in each case the significant factor in the outcome was the quality of the primary subject's testimony. She paused. In plain language, what you say, when you say it, and how you say it will matter enormously. We will prepare your deposition carefully. What do I say? Harry asked. Goldthorn looked at him. The truth, she said, as if this were obvious, which to her it clearly was. Exactly what happened, exactly what you remember, in your own words. Not filtered, not softened, not shaped for any particular audience. A pause. I have found, in my experience, that the unmediated truth is usually sufficient. It tends to be more damaging to the respondent than anything I could construct. Harry nodded slowly. One more thing, Goldthorn said. The headmaster will seek a private meeting with you. Possibly more than one. He will ask you to consider the larger picture. He will explain why the decisions made were necessary. He will not be lying, exactly, which will make it more difficult. She looked at him with those steady, unsparing eyes. I am advising you to decline any private meeting. Not because I think you cannot handle the conversation, but because private conversations leave no record, and in a legal process, unrecorded private conversations with a named respondent are useful only to the respondent. Harry thought about Dumbledore. The half-moon glasses and the blue eyes and the warmth that was entirely genuine and entirely beside the point. I can handle the conversation, he said. I believe you, Goldthorn said. Decline it anyway. She tucked the briefcase under her arm and looked at the room, at Ron still sitting in his chair, at Hermione who had produced a small notebook and was writing in it with the focused intensity of someone taking court notes, at the Weasley twins still in the doorway looking, for once, entirely serious, Your friends, she said to Harry. Yes. They may be useful. She looked at Hermione specifically. You've been reading the Act. Since 6 this morning, Hermione said, without looking up from her notebook. The 1979 Act was amended in 1993, Goldthorn said. The amendment extended mandatory reporting obligations to include any qualified magical practitioner present at the time of a diagnostic, not just the practitioner of record. It also extended the definition of reasonable cause to know in the secondary respondent clause. She paused, and there was something in her expression that might, on a less controlled face, have been satisfaction. The amendment was prompted by a case in which a St. Mungo's healer argued that they were not personally the practitioner of record and therefore had no reporting obligation despite being present for a diagnostic that revealed exactly this kind of injury history. Hermione's pen stopped. She looked up. Who was the healer in that case? Archibald Smethwick, Goldthorn said. In 1991 he was the practitioner of record and therefore the amended clause was, strictly speaking, inapplicable. However, a precise, measured pause. The fact that the precise case that prompted the amendment was also the man who failed to file the mandatory report. I expect the Wisengamot will find the historical detail instructive. There was a silence. Ron said very quietly, Bloody hell. Quite, said Goldthorn, and she turned and walked out of the room with the unhurried purpose of someone who had a great deal to do and fully intended to do all of it. Ragnarok remained a moment in the doorway. He looked at Harry once, and the look was brief and without performance, and Harry thought of what he had said the night before, a truth withheld as a cage, and thought that he was sitting in this hospital room with a broken shoulder and cracked ribs and a skeleton that had been carrying 23 secrets for 9 years. And for the first time in his life the cage door was not merely ajar but had been taken off its hinges entirely. Rest today, Ragnarok said. Tomorrow will be busier. He was right. Chapter 3. The hearing. The D'Amelio investigator arrived at 9 the next morning. Her name was Perkins, senior investigator Miriam Perkins, and she was a short, broad-shouldered woman with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had started out severe and been worn, over years of investigative work, into something that was more precisely calibrated than severe. She looked like someone who had heard a very large number of stories and had developed an excellent internal mechanism for distinguishing the ones that were true. She came in with a junior partner who was young enough that he still had the self-conscious look of someone performing competence rather than simply having it, and a self-inking quill that floated at his shoulder taking notes. And she sat in the chair across from Harry's bed, opened her file, and looked at him over the top of it with the direct, assessing look of someone who was going to take this interview seriously and wanted him to know it. Goldthorn sat in the corner. She had been there since 8, reviewing her own notes. She did not look up when Perkins arrived, which communicated something very specific about her relationship to the room. Mr. Potter, Perkins said, I want to thank you for agreeing to speak with me today. I understand you're still recovering from your injuries. I'm all right, Harry said. He was sitting up in the bed with his shoulder in a support brace, the regrowth charm completed overnight. The ribs ached when he breathed too deeply, but he could breathe, and he had slept, and Ragnarok had brought him breakfast himself at 7, which Harry suspected was not standard senior healer protocol but which he had appreciated. Before we begin, Goldthorn said from the corner, without looking up from her notes, I want the record to reflect that Mr. Potter is speaking voluntarily, that he has been advised of his right to decline any question, and that I am present as his legal advocate and will intervene if any line of questioning ventures outside the scope of the formal investigation. Noted, Perkins said, and turned a page in her file. Mr. Potter, I'm going to ask you to walk me through your childhood in as much detail as you feel comfortable with. Not just the specific incidents, the general shape of things. What the house was like, what the Dursleys were like, what daily life was like. I find that specific incidents make more sense when I understand the general environment first. All right. Harry thought about how to start, and decided to start at the beginning, the way you did when you were telling something true. I grew up at number 4, Privet Drive. It's a very normal-looking house. That's the thing about it. From the outside it looks exactly like every other house on the street. My aunt and uncle are very concerned about looking normal. Concerned in what way? In the way where anything that made them look abnormal was a problem. I made them look abnormal. By existing. He paused, not for effect, just because he was trying to be precise. I'm a wizard. My parents were magical. My aunt knew, she always knew, she hated my mum for it, and my uncle found out when they got together. So I was the wrong kind of thing in their house from the start. Something they'd been given that they didn't want and couldn't get rid of. Perkins was watching him steadily. The self-inking quill moved at the junior partner's shoulder without sound. Where did you sleep? The cupboard under the stairs. Until I was about 10 and a half, when the Hogwarts letters started coming and they had to give me Dudley's second bedroom to stop the letters arriving. But until then, the cupboard. For 10 years. From when I was about 1. Yes. Perkins made no sound and no expression. She wrote something in her file. What about food? Variable. Harry considered how to put this in a way that was accurate without making it bigger than it was. Dudley always had enough. I wasn't always fed on the same schedule. If I'd done something my uncle didn't like, or if things had gone wrong, sometimes I didn't eat for a day or 2. He paused. Not regularly. It wasn't a regular thing. Sometimes. And physical discipline? The phrase had the quality of something professionally shaped for this context, not a euphemism exactly, more like the language that had been developed over time to let people discuss something clearly without triggering the specific defensive response that blunter language triggered. Harry recognized it as a professional tool and respected that. My uncle hit me sometimes. When he was angry. And my cousin Dudley and his friends, they had this game called Harry hunting. Chase me and hit me when they caught me. Dudley was very large and very fast. I got good at hiding. He kept his voice even, looking at the middle distance over Perkins' shoulder. Some of the injuries on the diagnostic, the ribs, the knee, those were from falls. Actually falling. Running and falling because that was what you did when 4 large boys were behind you. He paused. And some of them are from my uncle. The wrist and some of the other ones. Was there anyone aware of the situation? Teachers, neighbors, anyone who might have, Mrs. Figg next door. Harry said. She was a squib. Dumbledore had placed her in the street to watch me. She used to babysit me when the Dursleys went out. He paused. She knew I wasn't happy there. I think she knew it was, I think she knew. But her role was to observe, not to intervene. She's testified about that since. He thought about Mrs. Figg at the ministry, the brief, unhappy way she described watching him. She did what she was told to do, which was to report back and do nothing else. Report back to whom? Dumbledore, Harry said. Everything in that arrangement reported back to Dumbledore. Perkins wrote for a moment. When you arrived at Hogwarts at age 11, did you tell any teacher or staff member about the conditions at the Dursleys? Harry thought about it honestly. Not directly. Madame Pomfrey, I was in the hospital wing enough times that she must have had questions. She's very professional. She fixed what needed fixing and didn't ask what she clearly wanted to ask. He paused. Professor McGonagall, I think she knew something was wrong. She's always been careful with me in a way that I didn't understand at the time, but that makes more sense now. He looked at his hands. But I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid of them. More because I didn't think of it as something to tell. It was just what my life was. Perkins looked up from her file. What changed? Harry looked at her. I saw the diagnostic results. I saw how many there were. 23. He paused. When you live with something, you stop seeing it as something. It's just the furniture of your life. Seeing it listed, seeing it as a number, that was different. The room was quiet except for the quill. Did Dumbledore ever discuss your home life with you? He told me once that my mother's love was a protection. Ancient magic, blood-based. I had to go back to my aunt's house every summer for the protection to renew itself. Harry's voice was careful. He told me the Dursleys were my family and family was important. He was kind about it. He always is. He paused. He never asked me how I was. Not specifically. He asked how I was doing in the general sense. He never asked what the house was like or what my aunt and uncle were like or whether I was getting enough to eat. Do you believe he knew about the conditions? Goldthorn looked up from the corner. That question calls for speculation about another party's state of knowledge, investigator. I'll rephrase, Perkins said without breaking pace. Did you ever communicate the conditions at the Dursleys to Dumbledore, directly or indirectly? Indirectly, Harry said. My third year, Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban. I overheard my uncle and aunt talking about him, about the danger. I told my uncle that Sirius was my godfather, and that if anything happened to me he'd want to know. He paused. I said it to make my uncle behave. It worked. But it also told Dumbledore, who heard about it from McGonagall, I think, that I was using the threat of a dangerous escaped convict to manage my relatives. He looked at Perkins. That's not a happy household dynamic. That's a 14-year-old managing an unstable environment with whatever tools he has. Something moved in Perkins' face, just a flicker, controlled and professional, but there. She wrote something in her file. Sirius Black, she said, and there was a particular quality to how she said it, careful and specific. He is your godfather. Yes. He was never contacted regarding guardianship during the time of your placement with the Dursleys. Not to my knowledge. He was in Azkaban. Harry met her eyes. He was convicted without a trial. The quill stopped moving. The junior partner looked up, which he had not done once since entering the room. Perkins looked at Harry over her file with an expression that had become considerably more concentrated. Without a trial, she said. I was there in third year when the truth came out, Harry said. He kept his voice steady and factual, because this was something he felt strongly about, and strong feelings in official contexts were a liability. He was learning. Peter Pettigrew is alive. He was the secret keeper for my parents, not Sirius. He faked his own death, framed Sirius, and spent 12 years living as my friend's pet rat. He paused while that sentence finished, doing what it always did to people who heard it for the first time. His name is Scabbers. Ron had him for 3 years. He's a registered animagus under a different name, the name he used before he faked his death. He paused. Sirius is innocent. He escaped from Azkaban to protect me from Pettigrew, who came back when Voldemort started trying to regain power. He said the name clearly, the way he always said it now, without flinching, because he had decided in fourth year that flinching at a name was a small unnecessary gift to someone who had not earned gifts. Perkins was still looking at him. The look had changed from investigative assessment to something else, something more layered, the look of someone who has opened a door they expected to lead to one room and found instead a staircase going considerably further down. Mr. Potter, she said, with careful control. Why was this not raised through official channels at the time? Dumbledore was there, Harry said, when Pettigrew was captured. And Fudge came to Hogwarts that night, Cornelius Fudge, the minister, and Dumbledore tried to tell him and Fudge wouldn't listen. Sirius escaped that night rather than go back to Azkaban, which meant there was no prisoner to produce for the trial. Harry paused. And so it just didn't happen. We went back to school. Summer came. I went back to Privet Drive. And Sirius went on the run and Pettigrew went back to Voldemort, and none of it was ever officially recorded. Goldthorn had her pen moving again, very quietly, in the corner. The name Peter Pettigrew, Perkins said. His legal death record. List him as killed by Sirius Black in October 1981. Harry said. He cut off his own finger and left it before he transformed. The ministry found the finger and assumed the worst. He paused. He's also a murderer. He killed 12 muggles in the street in the same incident. Perkins closed her file. She put it on her knee and sat with her hands flat on it, and looked at the middle distance for a moment in the way that people did when they needed to organize something large. Then she opened it again and turned to a fresh page. I am going to need, she said very steadily, to record everything you just told me as a formal statement. I know, Harry said. This will significantly expand the scope of the current investigation. I know. Are you prepared to give a full statement about the events of your third year, including named individuals and specific details? Yes. He paused. That's why I brought it up. Perkins looked at him for a moment. He met her eyes steadily, without challenge, without performance, with the simple directness of someone who had decided that the way forward was through the middle of the thing and had no interest in going around it. All right, she said. Let's go back to the beginning. They went for 4 hours. Goldthorn called a break at 11, when the junior partner's quill was starting to labor and Harry's ribs were objecting to 2 hours of sustained sitting upright. Ragnar came in with a pain potion and the expression of someone who had been monitoring the room from the corridor and had decided the situation required medical intervention. 15 minutes, Ragnar said. 30, Goldthorn countered. 20, Ragnar said and left. Harry drank the potion and lay back and looked at the ceiling. Perkins stepped out to speak to someone in the corridor. He could hear her low, controlled voice from outside, the cadence of someone giving instructions, and the junior partner sat in his chair with his quill resting and his face doing the involuntary processing of someone who had just taken down a very large and very strange body of testimony. Hermione had come in at some point during the morning and taken up position in the far corner near the window with her notebook and her quill. She had not spoken once, which was a demonstration of enormous self-discipline that Harry had noted and appreciated. Ron had been in and out. He dealt with things that required sustained quiet sitting by moving, and Harry had learned not to take this personally years ago. He'd come in and make some specific observation and then leave to walk the corridor and then come back again, and each time he came back his face was doing something slightly different as more of the testimony made it through whatever processing system Ron used. You doing all right? Hermione asked, from the window, during the break. Fine, Harry said. That's not what I asked? He looked at her. She was watching him with the focused attention that was her primary expression, but there was something else underneath it, something that the morning's testimony had put there, the particular kind of unsettled feeling that came from hearing someone you knew describe something in plain, factual language that you had not known before. I'm okay, he said more carefully. It's strange, talking about it like that. To an official person. Because it keeps, when I say things, I can see people reacting, and I don't always know how to. He stopped. I don't always understand what I'm saying is significant to them. Harry, Hermione said quietly. The wrist alone, I know. That's not a fall, she said, her voice very controlled. A compound fracture of the wrist that never saw a healer. That's not something that happens and gets ignored accidentally. I know, he said again. She pressed her lips together. He could see her containing something, the systematic fairness that was as much a part of her as her intelligence, fighting with the emotional response of someone sitting in a hospital room while her best friend described his childhood with the flat, careful accuracy of someone reading from a report. You're not angry, she said. Not accusatory. Puzzled. I'm something, Harry said. I don't know if it's anger exactly. It's more like, I've been very busy being in the middle of things that other people decided about me for a very long time. And now I'm not. Or I'm becoming not. And the feeling is, it's very large. He looked at the ceiling. I think if I let myself actually feel all of it at once I would stop being useful, and being useful is currently what matters. Hermione said nothing for a moment. Then she said, You're allowed to feel it. I know that too. I'm just saying. I know, he said. Thank you, Hermione. She went back to her notebook, and he went back to the ceiling, and the 20 minutes passed, and Perkins came back, and they went back to work. By 1 o'clock they had covered the third-year events in full. Perkins had asked questions Harry hadn't expected, precise, Lateral questions that suggested she was not simply recording testimony but building something, a structure that connected events that had previously been separate, and that structure was larger and more complicated than a child neglect case at number 4, Privet Drive. "Let's talk about the tournament," she said. "The Triwizard Tournament. You were entered as a 4th champion despite being under the age requirement." "Yes." "Did you enter yourself?" "No." He said it simply and clearly, because it was simply and clearly true, and he had said it approximately 30 times in the weeks since the goblet had produced his name and had never quite made Hogwarts' general population believe him, but here it felt like it might actually be recorded somewhere that mattered. "Who do you believe entered you?" "I don't know for certain," Harry said. "Someone who wanted me in the tournament for reasons I suspect had to do with using the tournament as a mechanism to get me to a specific location at the end." "The third task?" "Someone is planning something for after the third task and they need me present for it." He paused. "I've thought about this a lot. The goblet is powerful old magic. You'd need someone who understood it well enough to confound it into accepting a 4th school, a 4th champion, without breaking the magical contract. That requires a serious dark arts practitioner. And you believe this despite currently being mid-tournament and required to compete." "I'm required to compete because of the magical contract, yes?" "Refusing to compete the consequences would be significant, apparently." His voice was dry. "So I've been preparing for the tasks in the middle of everything else." Perkins looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Potter, you are currently dealing with a medical record that has initiated a major DMLE investigation, the legal exposure of your headmaster, the potential exoneration of your wrongfully imprisoned godfather, and an active Triwizard Tournament which you believe has been corrupted by an agent of Voldemort." She paused. "You're 14. "Yes," Harry said. "How are you?" She stopped. Started again. "What do you need?" "From this investigation. From the system. What do you actually need?" Harry thought about it. He thought about it genuinely, because Perkins was asking it as an investigator but also as something else, and the question deserved a genuine answer. "I need Sirius to be free," he said. "That matters most. He's been in Azkaban for 12 years for something he didn't do because no one ran a proper trial. I need that fixed." He paused. "I need to not go back to Privet Drive. Goldthorn is handling that. And I need—" He stopped. "What?" "I need Dumbledore to not be in charge of what happens to me," he said quietly. "I'm not trying to destroy him. I understand that he's done things that have mattered, that he fights Voldemort, that he's important. I'm not asking for his career to end. I'm asking to not be a piece that he moves around a board." He met Perkins' eyes. "I'm not a sacrifice. I'm a person." The quill moved. Perkins wrote something and then sat back. "We'll get you a formal statement signature this afternoon. The Pettigrew element is going to be passed to a separate investigative team. That's a distinct criminal case and it'll move quickly now that it's officially on record. Sirius Black's case file will be reopened." She paused. "I want you to know, Mr. Potter, that the standard in these investigations is that the primary subject, you, is kept informed of developments. You will receive regular updates. You will not be managed around." "I appreciate that." "I mean it," she said. "I have 3 daughters." It came out unexpectedly and she did not visibly expect it, which made it more honest than anything she'd said in 4 hours. She gathered herself. "The headmaster has requested to give a voluntary statement this afternoon. We'll be conducting his interview separately." Harry nodded. "He'll be very good at it." "I've been told," Perkins said. "He'll explain it well," Harry said. "The blood magic protection, the necessity, the larger context. He'll make it sound measured and reasonable because it is measured and reasonable, from inside his view of it." He paused. "But the diagnostic results are what they are regardless of the reasoning." "Yes," Perkins said. "They are." She stood. Shook Harry's hand, which surprised him slightly. "You're very precise," she said. "You'd make a good investigator." I've had a lot of practice noticing things people don't want me to notice, Harry said. She left. Goldthorn remained, making her notes in the corner. Harry lay back against the pillow and thought about Dumbledore sitting in an interview room with a self-inking quill moving at his shoulder, being measured and reasonable and entirely genuine in his description of how he had decided what was necessary, and he felt the complicated thing again, not anger, not quite, but something very close to it, something that had its temperature. Ragnar came in at 2 with the afternoon treatment schedule. Your ribs need another session, he said, reviewing his chart. The left upper fracture has a complication I didn't like this morning. Fine, Harry said. You're back. Ragnar paused. I'd like to start on the vertebral work this week, while we have you here. Some of the compressive damage is creating mild nerve impingement that will worsen with time if left. He looked at Harry carefully. You've been having headaches. Harry blinked. Sometimes. I thought that was the scar. Some of it may be the scar. Some of it is not. Ragnar made a notation. The body adapts very well, Mr. Potter. Sometimes so well that the adaptation becomes invisible. We will take it in stages. How many stages? 8, possibly 10 sessions. Some of the older sites are complicated. He paused. The bones remember everything. That is both the problem and the advantage, because they also respond well to proper treatment if you give them the right intervention at the right time. Harry was quiet for a moment. You know what the strangest part is? He said. I keep thinking about all the things I blamed on other things. I always thought I got headaches because of the scar. I thought my wrist ached in winter because of the cold. I thought my back hurt after long Quidditch practices because of the flying position. I had explanations for all of it. He paused. None of the explanations were right. The explanations that were available to you were the ones you had been given, Ragnar said. That is not the same as being wrong. It is having incomplete information. He sat on the rolling stool. The work we do now will correct the underlying causes. In a year you will feel considerably different. Better? Yes. Ragnar said it without hesitation, which Harry appreciated more than he was entirely able to express. What about? Harry stopped. What? The magic thing. Can bones, if bones didn't heal right, can that affect magic? I'm not saying my magic is wrong, I don't feel like it is, but I've wondered sometimes if my magic could have been suppressed? Ragnar looked at him with a directness that was not gentle but was entirely sincere. There is some evidence in Goblin medical literature that significant untreated skeletal injury in young magical children can create minor inhibitory effects on magical expression. The magical core and the physical body are not entirely separate systems. He paused. In your case, the magical core diagnostics we ran this morning suggest your core is very large and very stable. Whatever inhibitory effect the untreated injuries may have created, your magic has compensated. Of course it has, Harry said, and meant it without bitterness. He was starting to understand that this was what he did: compensate, adapt, find the functional path through whatever the body or the circumstances provided, and that this quality was not something to be sad about, exactly, but it was something to name. The binding diagnostic came back clean, Ragnar added. No compulsions. No loyalty charms. No oath bindings. A very slight pause. No tracking enchantments. Harry looked at him sharply. There was one, Ragnar said, in a perfectly even voice. On your Hogwarts trunk. A standard location monitor. It is within Hogwarts' rights to place location trackers on school property. It was not technically on you. He paused. However, since it was on the object most consistently physically near you, the practical effect was the same. Harry thought about this for a moment. The trunk he'd had since he was 11, bought in Diagon Alley. He went everywhere with that trunk. Can you remove it? I already have, Ragnar said. It was on hospital property when I performed the diagnostic. Hospital property is under Goblin medical jurisdiction during a patient's stay. He stood. It was not a harmful enchantment. But you should know it existed. Harry nodded. He was adding it to a list. The list was longer than he'd started with, and he suspected it would be longer still before this was done, and each addition to the list was a small specific thing that rearranged the furniture of what he understood about his own life. Ragnarok, he said. The goblin had already turned toward the door. He turned back. Is there anything else you found that I should know about? Harry asked. Anything on me? Medically, magically. Anything you found and haven't told me yet? Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Your magical core is unusually structured for someone your age, he said. The patterns suggest a forced maturation, an event in early life that accelerated the development of your core significantly beyond what would be normal for an infant. It is not harmful. It is likely the reason your magic has been as strong as it has despite the physical complications. He paused. The most likely cause of that kind of forced maturation is a significant magical event occurring very close to the individual in infancy. The night Voldemort killed my parents, Harry said. A killing curse rebounding off a sacrificial love ward at close range would be a significant magical event, yes. Ragnarok's voice was measured. It would also explain certain qualities of your magical signature that our diagnostics picked up, a layered quality, as if your own magic and something else have been living in the same space for a long time. Harry very carefully did not move. Something else. I want more time with that finding before I make any formal statement about it, Ragnarok said. It is complex and I want to be accurate rather than fast. He met Harry's eyes. I will tell you when I know more. I will not tell anyone else anything before I tell you. That is my undertaking. Harry held his gaze. Thank you. Rest until 4, Ragnarok said. Then we work on the left upper rib. He was nearly at the door when he paused. The headmaster submitted a formal request to visit you this afternoon. I declined it on medical grounds. Visiting hours are by patient authorization only, and you have not authorized him. He paused. He may submit another request tomorrow. Tell him to write a letter, Harry said. Something moved in Ragnarok's expression that might, under different lighting, have been a smile. I will convey that message professionally. He left, and Harry lay back in the clean pale green room and looked at the ceiling, and thought about magical cores and bone records and tracking charms on trunks and a layered quality in his magical signature as if something else had been living in the same space for a long time, and he thought about what Ragnarok had said the first night, that he didn't know what it was yet, but that he would tell Harry before anyone else. And he thought that this was what it felt like to have someone on your side who wasn't also managing you. It felt like ground under his feet. Outside, London was doing its afternoon thing, grey and ordinary and entirely indifferent to the fact that somewhere in a hospital room a 14-year-old boy was quietly and methodically becoming someone who was going to stop being managed. And in another room, somewhere in the building, a very intelligent old man with half-moon glasses was giving a very good voluntary statement about necessity and love and the terrible mathematics of sacrifice, and every word of it was true, and none of it was enough. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The emergency session of the Wizengamot was called for Thursday. Harry found out on Wednesday morning from Goldthorne, who arrived at St. Mungo's at 7:45 with a slim briefcase and the expression of someone who had been working since before the sun was properly up and considered this normal. She sat in the chair across from his bed, opened the briefcase, and told him in the same tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. The session has been convened under Article 12 of the Wizengamot Charter, she said, which allows for emergency proceedings when a matter of public interest intersects with an active criminal investigation. The chief warlock, who would normally chair, has recused himself given his status as secondary respondent. Madame Griselda Marchbanks will preside. Is that good? Harry asked. Marchbanks is 93, has no patience for theater, and once failed a student for incompetence despite the student's family endowing a building. She is as close to impartial as the Wizengamot gets. Goldthorne turned a page. You will be asked to give testimony. Not a deposition, live testimony, before the full chamber. Dumbledore will also testify. The Dursleys have been formally notified and have retained a solicitor through the Muggle courts who will be deeply out of his depth. Will Sirius, the Pettigrew matter is moving faster than the main investigation, Goldthorn said. Senior Investigator Perkins has filed for emergency case review. Peter Pettigrew's supposed death record has been flagged. Sirius Black's conviction record has been pulled and the absence of trial proceedings officially documented. She paused. There will be a parallel session on the Black matter immediately after the main hearing. It is possible, I want to be careful with the word possible, that Sirius Black could be a free man by Thursday evening. Harry sat with that for a moment. What do I need to do for that one? Corroborate the testimony you already gave Perkins. Answer questions about the third-year events. Be specific about Pettigrew, what he looked like, what he said, what happened. She looked at him. You said Albus Dumbledore was present when Pettigrew was identified. Yes. He will be asked about that specifically. A pause. I anticipate that his answer will be truthful and will be framed in a way that emphasizes the chaos of that evening and the absence of confirmable physical evidence rather than his subsequent choice not to push for a formal reopening of the case. That's accurate, Harry said. It was chaotic. Pettigrew escaped. There was no physical prisoner to produce. He paused. But Dumbledore knew. He knew Sirius was innocent. He told me so. Goldthorn's pen moved. He told you directly. In the hospital wing, after. He said Sirius was innocent and that we had to save him. He helped us. He sent us back in time to save Sirius. He stopped because this was one of those sentences that required a particular kind of delivery to not sound entirely deranged. Time Turner. Hermione had one. Dumbledore told us to use it. We went back 3 hours and freed Sirius from the tower. Goldthorn's pen had stopped. She looked at him over the briefcase with the expression of someone encountering a variable they hadn't accounted for. Dumbledore personally directed a student to use a time turner to extract a prisoner from Ministry custody. Yes. While also knowing that prisoner was innocent. Yes. And then did not use the knowledge that the prisoner was innocent, knowledge gained through his own facilitation of the escape, to pursue formal exoneration. He said there was no way to prove it without Pettigrew. And Pettigrew was gone. Harry paused. He's not wrong that it was complicated. He's never wrong that it's complicated. That's the problem. Goldthorn wrote for 30 seconds without speaking. When she stopped, she looked at the page and then at Harry with the expression she wore when she was building something, arranging components into structure. The time turner use is both helpful and complicated, she said. Helpful because it establishes beyond question that Dumbledore knew of Black's innocence, and chose the escape route over the formal exoneration route. Complicated because the person who operated the time turner is sitting in front of me and is also one of my primary clients in this case, and I do not want to create legal complications for you in the process of freeing your godfather. How do we manage that? I will review the time turner statutes this evening. She closed the briefcase. What I suspect is that Dumbledore's direction of the activity provides sufficient legal cover. If he ordered it, and he is himself under investigation, the liability sits with him rather than with a 13-year-old acting on his instruction. She paused. Do not mention the time turner tomorrow unless directly asked. If directly asked, answer honestly. Do not elaborate. All right. She stood. Get some sleep tonight. The chamber will be full. Cameras from the Daily Prophet will be outside. They cannot enter for a sealed session, but they will be present. Wear something that is not hospital robes. Harry looked down at the pale green fabric. I don't have anything else here. All my things are at Hogwarts. Goldthorn looked at him. She looked at the door. I'll send something, she said, in the tone of someone adding an item to a list that already had 40 things on it. You don't have to, get some sleep, she said and left. Ron arrived 20 minutes later with a bag from Molly Weasley that contained food, a change of clothes that had been guessed at in terms of size but were close enough, and a note in Molly's handwriting that read, We are all coming tomorrow. Do not tell us not to. Eat the chicken. The bag also contained, inexplicably, a pair of Fred and George's extendable ears, with a small note in George's handwriting, for after, when the adults start talking to each other instead of you. Love us. Harry ate the chicken. It was very good. He gave Ron the extendable ears and Ron looked at them and then at Harry, and they both understood that Ron was keeping the extendable ears. How are you actually? Ron said, sitting in the chair. I feel like I'm watching myself from slightly outside. Harry said honestly. Like I'm following a story about myself that I'm also in. Ron nodded like this made complete sense, which was one of the things Harry valued most about Ron. Hermione cried this morning, he said. She was reading the section of the Act about mandatory reporting and she didn't want anyone to see, so she went to the bathroom, but the twins could hear and then they were all. He stopped. You know the twins never cry. I know. George hit a wall, Ron said. Not hard. Just once. He apologized to the wall after. Harry looked at his hands. I don't want everyone to, yeah, well, Ron said in the particular tone he used when Harry was about to say something self-effacing that he found actively irritating. We don't want you to have had a childhood that produces a diagnostic that makes George hit a wall, and here we both are. Harry was quiet. I'm coming tomorrow, Ron said. Front row. And if Dumbledore tries any of that disappointed grandfather business, I'm going to, Ron. I'm not going to do anything, Ron said. I'm going to sit there and be very loud with my face. You do have a loud face. I know. It's a gift. The Wizengamot convened in the main chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic at 10 in the morning on Thursday. Harry arrived with Goldthorn, who had sent the clothes as promised, dark trousers, a white shirt, robes in a deep charcoal gray that were well-fitting in a way that Hogwarts robes never were because they were sized for him specifically. He looked, for the first time in his life, like someone who had been dressed with intention rather than obligation. The chamber was everything the Hogwarts Great Hall was not: low ceiling, dense, packed with benches rising in tiers around a central floor with a stone chair and a small table. The walls were dark wood and the air tasted of old magic and old deliberation, of centuries of decisions made in this room about other people's lives. The Wizengamot members sat in their purple robes in the tiered benches, 50 or 60 of them, and the public gallery above was full in a way that suggested the sealed session notice had not prevented the building from being comprehensively crowded in the corridors outside. Griselda Marchbank sat at the high bench at the front. She was a tiny woman who had somehow arranged herself in a way that took up more space than her size suggested was available, with an expression of focused impatience that made Harry immediately understand why Goldthorn had called her as close to impartial as the Wizengamot got. She looked like someone who had no time for nonsense, and had not had time for nonsense since approximately 1958. Dumbledore was already in the room when Harry arrived. He was sitting in the respondents' area to the left of the central floor, not in chains, because this was not a criminal trial but an emergency inquiry, and he was dressed simply in dark blue robes without stars. He looked, Harry thought, genuinely tired, and this was not performance because the man's performances were warm and this was not warm. He looked like someone who had spent several days considering a problem that did not have a solution he could entirely live with. He did not look guilty. That was the thing. He did not have the face of someone who believed they had done wrong. He had the face of someone engaged in a very difficult argument with themselves about the cost of right action. He looked at Harry when Harry came in. Harry looked back. Either of them nodded. The look lasted a moment and ended when Harry looked away first, not because he was uncomfortable, but because there was nothing more to read there that he hadn't already read, and he had other things to look at. Amelia Bones was in the prosecutor's seat to the right. Harry had seen her once before, at the Quidditch World Cup, and had registered her as formidable in the general way of senior ministry officials. Up close she was more specifically formidable, the kind of person who had arrived at their position through continuous sustained competence over a very long period, with a face that suggested they had seen attempts at various forms of manipulation and had developed robust defenses against all of them. She made brief eye contact with Harry as he was seated. Gave him a short, precise nod. He gave one back. "The emergency session of the Wisengamot is called to order," Marchbanks said, her voice carrying the room without apparent effort. "This session is convened under Article 12 of the Wisengamot Charter to examine matters arising from a mandatory medical report filed by Senior Healer Ragnarok of St. Mungo's Hospital on the 2nd of November, and subsequent investigative findings of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Respondents are Vernon and Petunia Disley as primary, and Albus Dumbledore as secondary under the directive clause." She paused. "The Disleys are represented by solicitor and are not present in person, which the chamber notes, and will note in the record. The headmaster is present. Senior Investigator Perkins will present the investigative findings, after which we will hear from the primary subject, Harry Potter. After which the secondary respondent will have opportunity to address the chamber." She looked over her glasses at the room with the expression of someone heading off several problems before they started. "This is an inquiry, not a trial. Questions will be addressed through the chair. Anyone who speaks out of turn will be removed, which I am prepared to enforce personally and will find professionally satisfying." Several Wisengamot members straightened slightly in their seats. Perkins presented the findings for 40 minutes. She did it with the same quality she'd brought to the hospital room, precise, structured, without theater, and the diagnostic results were projected by Ragnarok's obsidian disc, which had been provided to the chamber as evidence, the three-dimensional map of Harry's skeleton floating above the central floor in pale light that was visible from every tier of benches. The chamber was very quiet while it floated there. The silence had a particular quality to it, not the silence of shock, because some of the Wisengamot members were politicians and politicians were experienced at not showing shock, but the silence of people looking at something they could not deny was what it was. The map made the arguments complicated. 23 sites could not be explained away as a clumsy child. The age ranges and their distribution and the patterns of non-treatment arranged themselves into a picture that was not ambiguous. Harry sat at the central table and watched them looking at it and said nothing. Perkins summarized the investigative findings, including the 1991 admission and Smethwick's failure to file, including the timeline of Dumbledore's arrival at St. Mungo's 43 minutes after the report was sealed. She noted the mandatory reporting obligations and the failure thereof. She noted the directive clause and the grounds for naming the secondary respondent. She presented it all in the flat factual register of someone whose job was not to argue but to state, and the stating was more than sufficient. Then Marchbanks said, "Mr. Potter, if you're ready." Harry stood. He walked to the central chair and sat in it. The chair was stone and not comfortable, but he'd sat on harder things. He looked up at the tiers of purple robes and found the Weasleys in the public gallery, Arthur with his arm around Molly, Ron in the front row as promised, Hermione next to him with her notebook open but her pen unmoving, watching him with the concentrated attention of someone who was fully present. He found McGonagall in the row behind them, her hat straight and her face set, and the coals still burning quietly behind her eyes. He looked back at the chamber and began. He told the truth. He did not soften it, and he did not expand it, and he did not shape it for the room, because Goldthorn had told him that the unmediated truth was sufficient, and he believed her, and also because he was tired, not of the telling, specifically, but of the general work of managing other people's comfort with the facts of his own life. He had been doing that for years in a low-level ongoing way, and he was ready to stop. He told them about the cupboard. The dimensions of it. He still knew the dimensions, he had had years to measure them with the spread of his hands in the dark. He told them about the Disleys with the flat specificity of someone describing a place they had lived, without anger, without exaggeration, which turned out to be more effective than anger would have been. He told them about the tree incident and his arm, about Dudley's friends and the running and the falling, about the years of wearing Dudley's cast-off clothes and not understanding why he was different until he was 11 and an enormous man on a motorcycle arrived at a hut in the middle of the sea with a birthday cake. He told them what it was like to arrive at Hogwarts not knowing he was famous and to find out he was, and to spend 3 years flying back to Privet Drive every summer because the headmaster had said it was necessary, and the headmaster knew things Harry didn't, and that was simply how things were. He told them about Smethwick's 1991 admission. "I don't remember it," he said. "I was 11 and I was told to sit in the corridor. I didn't know what a diagnostic was. I didn't know what the law said. I didn't know anyone was supposed to ask me questions about my childhood." He paused. "I didn't know my childhood was something that produced questions." Somewhere in the tiered benches something moved. Not a sound, exactly, more a collective quality of attention shifting, 40 people adjusting the weight of what they were sitting with. "I want to be clear about something," Harry said, because it mattered that he was clear, because he wasn't here to perform victimhood, and he wasn't here to perform rage, and he wasn't here to give the Wisengamot a clean story about a monster and an innocent. Dumbledore is not a monster. He fights Voldemort. He is one of the primary reasons Voldemort does not currently have free run of the wizarding world. He is genuinely intelligent and genuinely brave, and I believe he genuinely cares what happens to me." He paused. "He made a decision in 1981 that I was more useful as a symbol than as a person. That I was more valuable placed where the blood protection worked than placed where I would be safe. That the needs of the larger situation outweighed the needs of one child." Another pause. "He may even have been right, in the utilitarian mathematics of it. I genuinely don't know. I don't know enough about the blood magic to argue with the protection rationale." He looked at the chamber. "But I know that no one ever asked me. Not once. Not what I needed, not what the cupboard was like, not whether I was eating. No one asked because I had been placed and the placing had been decided, and asking would have complicated the decision that had already been made." He stopped. "I am not asking you to decide whether Dumbledore is good or bad. I'm asking you to decide whether what was done was legal. Because the law says it wasn't. And the law says it wasn't for a reason." Marchbanks was looking at him over her glasses with an expression that was not readable in any simple way. She had been 93 years old for some time and had seen a great many things said in this chamber, and this expression suggested she was filing this one in a specific category. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Potter. You may be seated." He went back to the table. Goldthorn, sitting beside him, did not look at him, but she put a glass of water in front of him, which was the most Goldthorn form of acknowledgement available. Then Dumbledore stood. He walked to the central chair and sat in it with the ease of someone who had occupied that chair many times from the other side, as Chief Warlock, presiding over other people's testimonies. He folded his hands on the table and looked at the chamber and said, "I would like to begin by saying that Harry Potter's testimony is accurate in every factual detail, and I will not insult this chamber or him by disputing any of it." The room shifted again. It was a very good opening, and it was entirely genuine, which was the complicated thing about the man. "I placed Harry with his mother's remaining blood relative in November 1981 for a specific and documented magical reason," he said. "Lily Potter's sacrifice created a blood ward of extraordinary power. Its anchor was the surviving blood relationship between Harry and his aunt. The ward required that Harry return to that anchor point each year, and that the anchor point be maintained as his home. This was not a decision made arbitrarily. It was made on the advice of every magical authority I consulted at the time, including 2 blood magic specialists and a member of the Ancient Runes faculty." He paused. "The ward protected Harry's life on multiple documented occasions. I believe it was the correct decision." "And the conditions within that home?" Bones asked, from the right. "I was aware that the Dursley family was not a warm one," Dumbledore said. "I was not aware of the specific injuries. I accept that I should have been. I accept that the monitoring I had in place, Mrs. Figg, periodic outposts, my own visits, was insufficient to detect the level of harm that the diagnostic has now revealed." He paused, and something moved in his face that was not strategy, was older and less controlled. "I was wrong to believe that the presence of a blood ward constituted sufficient care. Those are different things, and I conflated them." He paused. "I do not offer this as an excuse. I offer it as an honest accounting of the error." It was, Harry thought from his seat, an extraordinary performance of honesty. Every word of it was true. That was what made it extraordinary. Regarding the 1991 admission, Bones said. A shorter pause this time. I was notified of Harry's admission in November 1991. I was not present for the diagnostic. I received a communication from Healer Smethwick indicating that the admission had been attended to and the presenting injury treated. He looked at his hands. I did not ask what the diagnostic showed. I assumed that if there were findings requiring action, Healer Smethwick would have told me. You assumed, Marchbanks said, and her voice was perfectly level, that the practitioner of record would file the mandatory report. Yes. And it did not occur to you to inquire. It did not. He met Marchbanks' eyes. I have asked myself, since Tuesday, whether it did not occur to me because it genuinely did not, or because some part of me did not want it to. He paused. I don't have a certain answer to that question. I have thought about it a great deal and I do not know. The chamber was quiet. This was the most damaging thing he had said, and it was the most honest thing he had said, and both of those were true at once, and Harry sat at the table and thought about what it cost a man like Dumbledore to say I don't know in front of 50 people and mean it. It cost him something real. But it was also, Harry thought, a controlled sacrifice. Give up the small ground to hold the larger position. Admit the question to avoid the certain answer. Bones was thorough. She asked about the mandate, the monitoring, the decision not to push for a formal trial reopening of the Sirius Black case. Dumbledore answered everything. His answers were not evasive, they were precise and full and acknowledged the failures they acknowledged while framing each one in the context of competing pressures, larger dangers, the continuing threat of Voldemort's return. He was making an argument. The argument was, I made hard choices under impossible conditions, and some of those choices caused harm that I regret, and the alternative choices might have caused more harm. It was not the argument of a villain. It was the argument of a general who had been fighting a war for 40 years and had learned to think in terms of acceptable losses. Harry thought, the problem with acceptable losses is that you have to be the one deciding what's acceptable. After 40 minutes, Marchbanks called a recess. The chamber noise rose immediately, 50 people having the conversation they'd been containing for an hour, and Harry stood and rolled his shoulder, which still ached, and Goldthorn materialized at his elbow. You did well, she said. I just told the truth. Yes, she said. That is what doing well looks like in a legal chamber. McGonagall reached him during the recess, navigating through the crowd with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to move through spaces and applied that knowledge without drawing attention. She stopped in front of him and looked at him for a moment. That was very brave, she said quietly. It wasn't really. I just talked. Courage is not always loud, she said, with a look that suggested she had been thinking about this for 3 days. Sometimes it is sitting in a stone chair in front of 50 people and saying in a perfectly level voice that you grew up in a cupboard. She paused. I owe you an apology. Professor, I taught you for 3 years, she said. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it, in the way that teachers do. There is a quality to children who have been neglected that is not always visible but is always present, and I felt it, and I told myself it wasn't my business. That Dumbledore had arranged it, and Dumbledore knew best. Her voice was controlled, and the coal behind her eyes was fully lit now, not burning quietly but burning. That was wrong. And I am sorry. Harry looked at her. He thought about what it must have cost her to say this in a Wisengamot recess with people moving around them. He thought about the quality of her care across 3 years. The half-moon glasses and the sharp tongue and the very specific look she gave him when she was worried and covering it. He thought about the way she had sat at his hospital bedside with her hat in her lap. You came with me to St. Mungo's, he said. Of course I did. You stayed. Where else would I be? He thought about all the summers. He thought about the ways in which the summers could have been different if someone had asked. He thought about how Blaine was a complicated architecture and how the people who deserved the most of it were the ones who had built the system, not the ones who had lived inside it. You couldn't have known everything, he said. Not without asking, And you'd been told it was handled. He paused. But thank you for the apology. She pressed her lips together. Nodded once, precisely. For what it's worth, he said. You're the teacher I trust most. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was entirely unguarded, which was so unusual for her face that it was almost strange to see. Then she said, You'll have a formal guardian arrangement in place before the end of this week, Mr. Potter. I intend to make certain of it personally. She straightened her hat. Now, eat something before the session resumes. You look like you haven't eaten since this morning. I had, eat something. Ron appeared beside him with a sandwich from somewhere, which was such a Ron Weasley thing to do in the middle of a Wisengamot recess that Harry laughed for the first time in days, a short, genuine sound that surprised him a little. The session reconvened. The afternoon moved through formal procedures and legal arguments, and the careful professional back and forth of Bones and Dumbledore's legal representation, which was a wizard named Clearwater who was very good and very expensive, and whose primary strategy was to emphasize the extraordinary historical context of the post-Voldemort period and the impossible decisions of a man who had been effectively fighting a war. It was a good strategy. Harry sat at the table and listened to it, and acknowledged internally that it was a good strategy because it was true. He had been asked to provide any final statement before the chamber deliberated, and he had thought about what that statement was going to be since the night before, lying in the hospital room looking at the ceiling, and he had decided to keep it very short. He stood. I'm not asking for Dumbledore to be destroyed, he said. I'm asking for something much smaller. I'm asking for the record to say what happened. Not what was intended. Not what might have been justified. What actually happened. He looked at the tiers of purple robes. Because what happened is that I was 1 year old and someone decided I was going to live in a specific house with a specific family regardless of what that house was like, and I was 11 years old and someone looked at a diagnostic result and made a decision not to complicate things. And I was 14 years old and a goblin healer performed a standard intake diagnostic and found 23 things that had been there for years and decided not to look away. He paused. I'm not a symbol. I'm not a sacrifice, and I'm not a weapon, and I'm not a chess piece. I'm a person. I would like the record to say that was forgotten for a while, and then remembered. He sat down. The chamber was quiet. Marchbanks looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. Chamber will deliberate, she said. 1 hour. The deliberation took 90 minutes. Harry sat in the anteroom with Goldthorn and the Weasleys and Hermione, who had stopped pretending to take notes and was simply sitting with her hands in her lap, and Ron, who had obtained more sandwiches from unknown sources, and McGonagall, who was standing near the window with the contained intensity of someone who was prepared to be furious with whatever outcome arrived if the outcome merited it. When they were called back in, Marchbanks read the findings in the flat, precise voice of someone reading a legal document rather than delivering a verdict, because that was what it was. The Dursleys were found in violation of the Child Welfare and Magical Persons Act, Section 44, on multiple counts. Formal charges were to be referred to both Muggle and magical law enforcement. Harry's placement with them was terminated immediately and permanently. The failure to file by Healer Smethwick, now deceased, which complicated formal proceedings, was entered into the record as a significant institutional failure requiring review of St. Mungo's mandatory reporting protocols. A formal inquiry was recommended. Albus Dumbledore, and here the chamber was very quiet, was found to have violated the directive clause of Section 44, subsection 3. The violation was characterized as a failure of oversight rather than active harm, which was a significant legal distinction. He was not removed from his position. He was formally censured, which was entered into the permanent Wisengamot record. His role as Harry Potter's de facto guardian authority was formally terminated and was not to be reinstated without Harry's explicit consent, reached independently, and without coercion. Harry heard this. He sat with it. It was not everything. It was not Azkaban, and it was not the end of Dumbledore, and he had said he wasn't asking for that, and he had meant it. but the formal censure and the permanent record meant that the thing that had happened was now in a place where it could not be undone or reframed or quietly filed away, and the termination of the guardian authority meant that the long arm of Dumbledore's management of his life had a legal boundary drawn around it that had not existed yesterday. He looked at the chamber ceiling. Old stone, old magic, old decisions. And in the middle of it, one new one. Then Marchbanks said, "The chamber will now hear the matter of Sirius Black." That session took 45 minutes. The evidence was straightforward. The absence of a trial was documented fact. The Pettigrew death record, the severed finger, the 12 Muggle deaths, the witness statements from the third-year events that Harry and Hermione had provided, Dumbledore's testimony, given with the careful precision of a man fully aware that this testimony could not be given without implicating his own failure to push for formal exoneration 3 years ago, and who gave it anyway. Sirius Orion Black was declared innocent of all charges at 4:47 in the afternoon. In the anteroom where the Weasleys were waiting for a second time, Molly Weasley cried, which she had clearly been holding back since November, and released now with the thoroughness of someone who had been waiting for a sanctioned moment. Fred and George sat on either side of Harry on the bench, and one of them, he couldn't immediately tell which, put an arm around his shoulder, the uninjured one, and said nothing, which was the exact right thing. Ron was looking at him. "He's free," he said. "He's actually free." "Yeah," Harry said. The word was not large enough. But it was the right word. Dumbledore found him in the corridor outside the chamber, as the crowd was dispersing. He did not try to engineer privacy. He simply stopped when Harry was near and said, "Harry," in the voice that was his actual voice, not the warm managed version, the tired genuine one. Harry stopped. Goldthorn materialized at his left. "Mr. Potter's schedule, 1 minute," Harry said. He looked at Goldthorn. She looked back. She stepped back 2 paces, which was not what she'd advised but was her way of accepting that he had made a decision. He looked at Dumbledore. The man looked, up close in the corridor, genuinely old in a way that the chamber's formal setting had contained. "I want to say that what you said in there, I don't need you to comment on it," Harry said. His voice was not unkind. It was simply certain. Dumbledore was quiet. "I understand why you did what you did," Harry said. "I think I understand it better than you might expect. I've been inside it long enough to see the shape of it." He paused. "That doesn't mean it was acceptable. Both of those things are true." He paused again. "And I'm going to need you to not be in charge of my life anymore. Not because I hate you. Because I need to know what it's like to make my own decisions without someone managing what I know and where I go and what I'm being prepared for." Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were very old. "You'll still need guidance," he said. "What's coming is coming regardless," Harry said. "I know that. And I'll face it. But I'll face it as myself, not as whatever version of me is most useful for the plan." He held his gaze for a moment. "You're not a bad man. I'm saying that genuinely. But you need to understand that being a good man who causes harm is not automatically different from being a bad man who causes harm, in the body of the person experiencing it." He stepped back. "Good evening, Professor," he said. He turned and walked down the corridor toward where Goldthorn was waiting, where Ron was waiting, where the Weasleys were waiting with Molly who had been crying and George who had hit a wall, and all of it, all the ordinary furious love of them, was waiting for him down the corridor. He did not look back. Dumbledore stood in the corridor alone with the sound of the ministry around him, all its ordinary machinery, and watched Harry Potter walk away with his shoulders straight and his step unhurried, not angry, not triumphant, simply moving forward with the particular certainty of someone who has finally found the ground under their feet. Chapter 5. The fracture. Sirius Black had been living in a cave on the outskirts of Hogsmeade for 3 weeks when the owl found him. It was a ministry owl, fat, official, self-important in the way of all ministry owls, and it arrived at the cave entrance at 6 in the morning with a sealed envelope and the expression of a bird that had not enjoyed the journey and wanted this noted. Sirius took the envelope from it with hands that had not entirely stopped shaking since he'd seen Harry's name come out of the goblet of fire 2 weeks ago. The envelope was stamped with the Wisengamot seal. He opened it standing in the cave entrance with the Scottish dawn coming in grey and cold over the hillside, and he read it once, and then he sat down on the cave floor because his legs had decided to stop working, and he read it again. In the matter of Sirius Orion Black, formerly of Azkaban Prison, the Wisengamot has reviewed the case record and finds that the subject was imprisoned without trial in violation of Section 12 of the Magical Law Enforcement Code. In light of testimony establishing the survival of Peter Pettigrew and Pettigrew's identity, as the secret keeper of the Fidelius charm protecting the Potter family, all charges against Sirius Orion Black are hereby vacated. The subject is declared innocent of all charges and is entitled to full restoration of his legal standing, property rights, and civil liberties under wizarding law. There was more. Compensation figures. Formal apology language in the precise bloodless prose of ministry legal documents. A contact at the DMLE for processing his reinstatement. He sat on the cave floor for a long time. He thought about 12 years. He thought about James, about the specific geography of October 1981, about arriving at Godric's Hollow and the house and what the house had looked like after. He thought about the courtroom that had never happened, the defense he'd never given because no one had asked for one. He thought about the Dementors and what the Dementors did and the long cold years of it, and about the single sustaining thought that had kept him from losing himself entirely. I am innocent, I am innocent, I am innocent, and about what it felt like to have that finally, 12 years late, written down in official ministry ink. Then he thought about Harry. He transformed, and he ran. The DMLE processing office was not a dramatic location. It was a standard ministry corridor with a standard ministry waiting area and a standard ministry official behind a desk who nevertheless had the extremely non-standard experience of Sirius Black walking in wearing robes that had seen better years and requesting his formal reinstatement paperwork with the focused intensity of someone who had been waiting 12 years and intended to complete this particular task before lunch. The official, a young woman with reading glasses who to her considerable credit did not visibly panic, consulted 3 files, made 2 fireplace calls, and had the primary reinstatement paperwork completed in 40 minutes. Sirius signed it with the quill provided and the quill's enchantment that confirmed identity flashed gold, and that was that. He existed again. Legally, fully, with rights. He was out of the ministry and at St. Mungo's by 9:30. Harry was in his 4th treatment session with Ragnarok when the commotion started in the corridor outside. He couldn't hear the words, but he could hear the velocity of it, someone moving fast and talking faster, and the specific register of a St. Mungo's nurse attempting to enforce visiting hours protocols against someone who was not interested in visiting hours protocols, and then a voice he knew well enough to identify through 2 walls and a closed door. He looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at the door. "He has valid documentation," he said. "Can you? I'll finish the vertebral work first," Ragnarok said, which was healer for hold still. Harry held still. The work on his back had been ongoing for 3 days now, and it was not pleasant, but it was transformative in a way that was hard to describe, each session unwinding something that had been wound for years, and afterward there was a quality of ease in his body that he was still adjusting to, a kind of physical fluency that he hadn't known was missing. Ragnarok finished the session, made his notation, and without commentary walked to the door and opened it. Sirius Black was in the corridor. He was wearing robes that had been good in 1981 and had not been updated since, and had furthermore spent the last several months in a cave, and his hair was not at its best, and he was in the middle of a heated but contained argument with a nurse about ward access that he paused mid-sentence when the door opened. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. Ragnarok said, 15 minutes, then I need the patient to rest," and stepped past Sirius into the corridor to give them the room. Sirius came in. He closed the door, and stood just inside it, and looked at Harry with an expression that was doing too many things at once to be read cleanly: relief and grief and fury and something fiercely protective that was so intense it had physical weight. "You look terrible," Harry said. Sirius laughed. It came out rough and slightly broken at the edges, the laugh of someone who had not laughed properly in a long time. "I've been living in a cave." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Harry's shoulder brace, the careful way Harry was sitting, the overall presentation of someone mid-treatment. "How bad?" "Better than when I came in." "Ragnar's very good. I read the diagnostic report." His voice had changed. "Goldthorn sent me a copy as soon as I filed the reinstatement paperwork," she said. He stopped. Started again. "She said as your godfather I was entitled to the medical record." "You are." Sirius looked at his hands. He had the large scarred hands of someone who had been through a great deal and had the physical record of it. "I should have been there," he said. "You were in Azkaban. Before that." "I should have." He stopped again. "When Lily and James died, I should not have gone after Peter. I should have gone to Dumbledore and said, 'Take Harry, take him right now, here is who the secret keeper was, here is why the betrayal is not Remus, please make sure Harry is not left with Petunia Disley.'" His voice had gone rough. "I should have thought about Harry first. I thought about revenge first. And it cost you 12 years, and it cost me 12 years, and it cost—" He ran a hand through his hair, which did not improve it. "I'm sorry. I know that's not sufficient." "Sirius," Harry said. "Stop." Sirius stopped. "You were 21 years old," Harry said. "Your best friends had just been murdered. You were grief-mad. You made the wrong decision. And then you spent 12 years in Azkaban for someone else's crime." He looked at his godfather steadily. "I'm not going to sit here and let you apologize for what Peter Pettigrew and Voldemort did." Sirius looked at him. His eyes were gray and very clear and slightly desperate. "You're 14, he said. "I've had an eventful 14 years. That's—" Sirius made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "That's the understatement of the century, pup. Pup." The word landed and Harry let it land without deflecting it, which was something he was practicing, allowing things that were offered with genuine warmth to be received as such rather than immediately repackaged into something more manageable. "Goldthorn says you can be my formal guardian," Harry said. "Now that you're cleared." "If you— Yes," Sirius said, immediately and completely. "You didn't let me finish." "I don't need you to finish." "The answer is yes." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at Harry with the directness of someone who had thought about nothing else for 3 days. "I have a house. It's terrible. It's been empty for 12 years and my mother's portrait is still in the entrance hall, and the wallpaper is genuinely disturbing, but it exists, and it is mine. You can live there. This summer and every summer. Or whenever." He paused. "Or all the time, if you wanted. We'd have to look at the legal status of Hogwarts during term." "I want to stay at Hogwarts during term." "Fine. But summers are mine." He said this with a finality that was not exactly a question. "I have 12 years of missed Christmases and summers and birthdays to begin addressing, and I intend to address them aggressively." Harry thought about Privet Drive. He thought about the cupboard and the second bedroom and the very normal-looking house on the very normal-looking street where he had been put as an infant like a problem that had been filed away. He thought about what the word home meant and had not meant and might mean. "Summers are yours," he said. Sirius reached out and gripped his shoulder, the uninjured one, with the automatic care of someone who had read the medical report, and didn't say anything, because some things didn't improve with words. Harry sat with it. The formal guardianship paperwork took 3 days to process. Goldthorn handled it with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this specific filing since the moment the Wisengamot session ended, and Sirius signed everything put in front of him with the focused speed of someone checking items off a list they'd been composing for 12 years. On the 3rd day, Amelia Bones came to St. Mungo's. She came alone, without a junior partner, without a self-inking quill, which told Harry this was not an official visit. She knocked on his door, which Perkins had not done, and waited to be told to come in. "Mr. Potter," she said, "I won't take much of your time. I wanted to tell you personally that the Pettigrew investigation is moving. We've issued a formal warrant. He's classified as alive under magical law, which means he's also classified as a fugitive from the 12 Muggle murders. She paused. It's possible he'll go to ground. He's had 12 years of practice disappearing. But the warrant is real and the investigation is active and it will not be quietly shelved. Thank you, Harry said. She stood in the doorway with her hands clasped behind her back in the posture of someone who had said what they came to say and was deciding whether to say the additional thing. She decided to. What you did in that chamber, she said, was not easy. Giving that kind of testimony about a man who has the standing Dumbledore has, in that room, to those people, many adults wouldn't have managed it. She paused. I've been in the DMLE for 22 years. I've seen a great many people sit in that chair. She said nothing more, but the way she said nothing more communicated a precise evaluation. He's not destroyed, Harry said. I want you to know that was intentional. I know, she said. I know because I've seen what testimony looks like when it's designed to destroy someone, and yours wasn't. Yours was. She seemed to choose her word with care. Accurate. Accurate was all I needed it to be. She nodded once. There's one more thing, she said, and her voice shifted very slightly. Cornelius Fudge is aware of the Pettigrew finding. He is aware that it could have been, that the case could have been resolved in 1993 if he had listened to Dumbledore at the time. She paused. He is aware that he personally refused to hear evidence on the night Sirius escaped. He is managing this awareness in the way that Cornelius Fudge manages most uncomfortable awarenesses, which is to say he is attempting to get ahead of the story before the prophet runs it. What does that mean for me? It means he may attempt to reach out, to frame himself as someone who, once the evidence was properly presented, acted swiftly and decisively. She paused. He may also attempt to frame the Wisengamot session as a victory for Ministry decisiveness rather than as the result of a mandatory report filed by a Goblin healer over institutional resistance. Harry thought about this. Will he succeed? With some people, yes. With the prophet, possibly. With you, I suspect not. She paused. I wanted you to be prepared for it. I appreciate that, Harry said and meant it. She left. Ragnarok came in 20 minutes later for the afternoon session and found Harry sitting with the particular expression he wore when he had received new information and was integrating it. Political visit? Ragnarok asked, settling on the rolling stool. Bones, Harry said. Warning me about Fudge. Useful woman, Ragnarok said. He withdrew the wand and the bone rod. Your back today is the upper vertebral work. This one will be more intensive than the previous sessions. Is it going to hurt? Yes, Ragnarok said simply. Pain block first. Then some residual discomfort. It will feel better by morning. He uncapped the pain block potion and handed it across. Drink it slowly this time. You drank the last one too fast. I was trying to drink it slowly, Ragnarok said. Harry drank it slowly. While the block was establishing, Ragnarok began the preliminary diagnostic pass, and Harry said, You said there was something in my magical signature. The layered quality. You said you'd tell me when you knew more. Ragnarok's wand paused. Then continued. I've been in consultation with 2 colleagues at the Goblin High Council who specialize in complex magical diagnostics. He paused. What we found in your magical signature is consistent with what is described in certain older magical texts as a soul fragment. Harry waited. A soul fragment, Ragnarok said carefully, occurs when an individual performs an act of magic so violent and so fundamentally against the natural order that it fractures their own soul. The fragment produced can, under specific circumstances, attach to another living thing present at the moment of fracture. He paused. The most likely mechanism for the creation and attachment of a soul fragment in your case is the night of October 31st, 1981. A killing curse cast at an infant. The curse rebounded. The caster's soul, already fractured by previous acts of extreme dark magic, fractured again. A fragment attached to the nearest living thing. The pain block was working. Harry sat in his painless body and thought about this with the clarity that physical comfort allowed. It attached to me, he said. It appears so, yes. So there is something of Voldemort inside me. A fragment of what Voldemort's soul was before it became what it is now, Ragnock said. It is not him. It does not control you or communicate with you in any directed way. But it may explain certain connections, the Parseltum, the empathic connection you've described between your scar and his moods. He paused. And it is something that would need to be considered carefully if, and when Voldemort is fully dealt with. Harry thought about this for a long moment. Can it be removed? That is the right question, Ragnock said. The honest answer is that our current medical literature does not have a clear and safe answer to that question. The fragment is integrated into your magical signature at a deep level. Extraction, if possible, would require expertise that we are currently researching. He paused. I want to be accurate with you. I don't know how to remove it. I know it exists. I know it is not actively harming you in the present. And I know that leaving it there indefinitely is not acceptable either. Does Dumbledore know? A silence. I believe, Ragnock said carefully, that this finding would not be surprising to him. Harry felt something cold move through him that was not the pain block. He knows. I cannot confirm what another party knows or doesn't know. I can tell you that this finding is visible to anyone who performs a sufficiently advanced magical diagnostic, and that Dumbledore has access to advanced magical diagnostics, and that the nature of the connection between you and Voldemort has been visible in various ways since you were a child. He paused. I can also tell you that the implications of a soul fragment's presence in a living host, in terms of what would be required to destroy the fragment, are significant. And that an individual who thinks in terms of necessary sacrifices would find those implications relevant to his planning. The room was very quiet. Harry sat in the quiet and let the implications arrive at their own pace. They arrived, and they were large, and he sat with them. He had wondered, in the abstract way that you wondered about things you couldn't quite look at directly, whether Dumbledore's management of him had a specific endpoint in mind. Whether the preparation, the careful shaping of what Harry knew and didn't know, and how he thought about Voldemort, and what he was willing to sacrifice, whether it had always been pointed at something specific. Now he knew. He was going to send me to die, Harry said. Not a question. I don't know that, Ragnock said. You're being careful with the word. I am always careful with words. It is accurate care, not evasive care. Ragnock's voice was steady. I can tell you that the destruction of a soul fragment in a living host would historically require the death of that host. I can tell you that if you are the host. And I can tell you that the implication of what I've told you is significant. He paused. Whether Dumbledore intended to tell you, and when, and what his plan was, I don't know. I only know what the diagnostic shows. Is there another way? Harry asked. To get rid of it without, is there any other mechanism? I am researching it, Ragnock said. I want to be clear that this is not a search I'm conducting with any expectation of failure. I am a healer. My function is to solve medical problems. I have not encountered a medical problem yet that did not have a solution if you looked for it with sufficient thoroughness. His voice had the quality of someone making an undertaking. I will find an answer. It may take time. But I will find it. Harry looked at him. You didn't have to take this case, he said. Any of it. Filing the report, the advocate, the diagnostic research. You didn't have to do any of it. I am the senior healer of record, Ragnock said. All of it falls within my professional obligations. Ragnock. The goblin paused. You took an earlier train, Harry said. Ragnock's expression did something brief and complicated. The soul fragment work, he said, returning to the clinical voice, requires that I continue monitoring your magical signature weekly. I will adjust the treatment schedule to accommodate this. Thank you, Harry said, and let him have the deflection, because Ragnarok had earned the right to be professional about his own choices. Hermione came alone that afternoon. Ron had gone home for the day at Molly's insistence. You've barely eaten and you're going grey, come home. And Sirius was dealing with the Grimmauld Place administrative nightmare of restoring a magical house to habitable status after 12 years of vacancy, which apparently involved paperwork and a great many letters to the Goblin Estate's management office, and Harry had the room to himself when she arrived. She sat in the chair and put her notebook on her knee and then did not open it, which was how he knew she wasn't here to discuss legal developments. Ragnarok told me, he said. The soul fragment thing. She looked at him. He told you today? This afternoon? She was quiet for a moment. Harry, She stopped. I read everything I could find about Horcruxes last week because I had a theory and I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, and I was going to tell you, but I wanted more time to research whether there was a way to, you knew. I strongly suspected. Her voice was careful with the distinction. It's consistent with everything. The Parseltongue, the connection, the way the scar. She stopped. I should have told you sooner. I was trying to find the solution first so the information came with an answer. Harry looked at her. She was doing the thing she did when she had made an error that she had identified and was in the process of accounting for it with the same thoroughness she applied to everything. Her face was not comfortable. Ragnarok's researching it, he said. I know. I've already asked him if I can review his sources. She paused. He said yes, which surprised me, and then he gave me a list of 47 Goblin medical texts and told me to start with numbers 3, 12, and 31. Did you? I'm on number 3. She paused. It's in gobbledygook. I'm working on the translation. Harry stared at her. It's not that different from rune structures I already know. Give me a week. He looked at the ceiling. He felt, again, the thing that had been building since St. Mungo's, the thing that was not hope exactly but was solidifying into something related, something that had a foundation. He had Ragnarok, who was researching with the thoroughness of someone who did not accept no answer as an outcome. He had Hermione, who was translating Goblin medical texts. He had Goldthorn, who had taken an earlier train. He had Sirius, who had said yes before the question was finished. He was not alone in the way that he had been alone before, which was not the absence of people but the presence of people who were all, in different ways, managing him. This was different. This was people working alongside him, in his direction, without agenda. I'm going to need to learn more, Harry said. About Horcruxes. About what he made and where they are. If there are more of them, there almost certainly are. Hermione said quietly. The soul fragment in you was created accidentally. If he was creating them deliberately, and all the evidence suggests he was, there would be others. Then we find them, Harry said. All of them. He paused. Not because Dumbledore sent me to do it. Not because someone decided it was my destiny. Because it's the actual problem that needs solving and I'm in the best position to help solve it. He looked at her. I'm not going to be managed through this. I'm going to be in it with information. Hermione looked at him for a moment. You're different, she said. From what? From before. Before the hospital. She chose her words. You used to, there was always this quality of waiting. Like you were always waiting for someone to tell you what to do next, or what was happening, or what the plan was. And now you. She paused. You don't look like you're waiting anymore. He thought about this. He thought about the diagnostic and the disc and the map of 23 colors above his palm. He thought about Ragnarok saying a truth withheld as a cage. He thought about Goldthorn opening a briefcase with a clean, decisive snap and saying, I have filed the suspension notice on the train. I'm not, he said simply. The letter from Dumbledore arrived on the 5th day. It was not a howler, and it was not a formal communication. It was handwritten on plain parchment in the neat, distinctive script Harry recognized from countless Hogwarts notices and end-of-year speeches. Dear Harry, I have not written to ask anything of you. I am writing only to say that I am aware of what the investigation has revealed and I am sitting with the full weight of it. I will not tell you that my intentions were good, because I suspect you know that and also understand that intentions are only one part of any accounting. I would like, when you are ready, and only when you are ready, to tell you what I know about the Horcruxes. What I have found, what I believe exists, what I have already begun working to locate. This information is yours to have. It was always yours to have. I held it because I believed you were not ready, and I have spent a great deal of this week understanding that that belief was another form of the same error. I am not asking for forgiveness or for a restored relationship. I am telling you that information which is relevant to your life and survival exists, and that it will be waiting for you whenever you want it. On your terms, with whoever you want present. I remain, whatever else has changed, someone who cares what happens to you. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he handed it to Goldthorne, who was in the room doing paperwork at the window desk. She read it. Said nothing. Handed it back. What do you think? Harry asked. I think it is a genuine letter, she said. I think the offer is sincere. I think the soul fragment information he has may be significant, and I think accepting the meeting, with conditions, would be strategically sound. What conditions? Ragnarok present. Me present. Written transcript. She paused. And you drive the agenda. You tell him what you want to know. He answers. He does not redirect. Harry nodded. I want Sirius there too. That may produce an emotionally volatile dynamic. I know. He paused. I want him there anyway. All right. She wrote something in her notebook. I'll arrange it for next week, once the immediate treatment phase is complete. She paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Potter, what he says at the end. I remain, whatever else has changed, someone who cares what happens to you. I believe that is true. So do I, Harry said. And it doesn't change what happened. But I'm not sure it was supposed to. He folded the letter. I'm not trying to decide how to feel about him. I'm trying to figure out how to deal with the actual problem, which is Voldemort and the Horcruxes and the tournament. And he has information that helps with that. He paused. That's all I need from him right now. Just the information. Goldthorne looked at him for a moment. You are considerably more emotionally sophisticated than 14, she said, which from Goldthorne was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I've had a lot of time to think, Harry said. Sleep, she said, and closed her notebook. The last night before discharge, Ragnarok came in late. It was past visiting hours and past the evening treatment, and there was no clinical reason for the visit, which Harry noted. Ragnarok sat on the rolling stool and had no clipboard and no case and looked at Harry with the direct manner that was his default register. You're leaving tomorrow, he said. Back to Hogwarts for the rest of term. Then Grimmauld Place in December. Your next treatment session will be at St. Mungo's outpatient in 2 weeks. The remaining vertebral work needs 3 more sessions. He paused. The soul fragment monitoring will continue weekly. I have arranged for a ward at St. Mungo's specifically. You can come in each Monday. Thank you. The Horcrux research. He paused with the careful precision of someone choosing the next word exactly. My colleagues at the Council have identified 2 texts that may be relevant to the question of extraction without fatal harm to the host. They are very old and the methodology described is not proven. But they exist and we are pursuing them. Harry nodded. I'll be all right, he said. I know, Ragnarok said. I am not concerned about whether you will be all right. I am concerned about whether you will be all right with full information and proper medical support, which is a different thing. He paused. You have a tendency to decide you are fine because the alternative is not being fine, and I want you to understand that the medical reality of your situation requires ongoing attention regardless of your assessment of your own resilience. That's very politely said. I am professionally polite. Ragnarok paused. When you leave tomorrow, you will have Sirius Black as your formal guardian, Advocate Goldthorne as your legal representative, and Senior Investigator Perkins active on the Dursley charges and the Pettigrew warrant. You will have Ms. Granger translating Goblin medical texts. You will have a formal meeting with Dumbledore on your terms in 10 days. He listed these as if checking a chart. You are not, for the first time in your life, alone in this. I know, Harry said quietly. I am also, this is not a professional statement, I am also personally available. He said it with the discomfort of someone making a personal statement who did not make personal statements often. The Goblin High Council has a communications ward. Any Goblin healer at St. Mungo's can relay a message to me. He paused. If something arises. Harry looked at him for a moment. You remind me of someone, he said. Who? McGonagall. Same energy. Very professional. Cares more than she admits. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was controlled and then wasn't, just briefly, before it was controlled again. Get some sleep, he said. He stood and moved to the door and Harry said, Ragnarok. When this is done. The Horcrux, Voldemort, all of it. I'm going to come back to St. Mungo's and I'm going to sit in that chair by your desk and I'm going to tell you it's done. Ragnarok looked back at him from the doorway. The pale hospital light caught the amber of his eyes. I'll have the diagnostic ready, he said. And he left. Harry lay back in the clean pale green bed for the last time, with London doing its nighttime thing beyond the frosted window, and thought about tomorrow. About Hogwarts. About the tournament still waiting with its third task still ahead. About a cave outside Hogsmeade that was empty now because its occupant had somewhere better to be. About Grimmauld Place, terrible and full of disturbing wallpaper and one extremely opinionated portrait, which was going to be home. About a letter folded on his bedside table from an old man who was not a monster, and had caused harm and had loved him in the only way he knew how, which was not enough but was real. About 23 fracture sites, addressed now, healing correctly for the first time, his skeleton finally telling a story that had a second chapter. He slept well, which was something he had not done in a very long time.